The desert sun hung like a molten gold coin in the cloudless Texas sky. Along Interstate 10, a black Ford F-150 thundered eastward, its weathered frame carrying a man whose reputation had once echoed through the battlefields of Iraq. Colonel Frank Steele Carson squinted against the harsh light, his calloused fingers tapping a restless rhythm on the steering wheel. The flat, endless landscape of West Texas rolled by, a pale yellow canvas punctuated by the occasional scrub brush or oil derrick. The radio played a Johnny Cash song about war and regret. Carson reached over and turned it up slightly, the man in black's gravelly voice a fitting soundtrack to his thoughts. At 58, Frank Carson was what younger officers respectfully called old school. His face, tanned and lined from decades under the desert sun, bore the stoic expression of a man who had seen too much but spoken too little about it. A green highway sign announced Fort Bliss was 30 miles ahead. Carson's stomach tightened. 14 years had passed since he'd commanded the legendary Desert Hammers tank platoon during Operation Desert Storm. 14 years since his M1A1 Abrams tanks had torn through the Iraqi Republican Guard like a hot knife through butter. 14 years since he'd earned the nickname Steel after his tank took a direct hit from a T-72 and kept fighting. Carson adjusted the Bronze Star that hung from his rearview mirror, a habit born of respect rather than pride. The metal swung gently, catching the sunlight. It wasn't his. It had belonged to Staff Sergeant Leon Jackson, Carson's gunner, who hadn't made it home. For each mission, Carson touched that metal as a silent promise to the men he led. Some promises outlived the war. The highway curved around a rocky outcropping, and suddenly the sprawling expanse of Fort Bliss appeared on the horizon. White buildings shimmered in the heat, American flags standing at rigid attention against the blue sky. This wasn't a nostalgic homecoming. 3 days ago, Carson had received a phone call that had pulled him out of his comfortable semi-retirement as a training consultant. Colonel Carson, Major General Howard had said, his voice carrying the weight of authority that hadn't changed since Carson had served under him years ago. "We need you at Fort Bliss. It's about the M1A3 program." Carson had asked few questions. When a two-star general personally requested your presence, you showed up. But he knew enough about the M1A3 Abrams development program to be concerned. The next generation of American main battle tanks represented billions in defense contracts and years of development. If they were calling him in from the sidelines, something was wrong. The security checkpoint at Fort Bliss loomed ahead. Carson slowed the truck, rolling down his window as a young military police officer approached. The cool air conditioning escaped into the hot Texas air. Colonel Frank Carson, reporting as requested by General Howard. The MP checked his ID against the clipboard, then snapped to attention with a crisp salute. "Welcome back to Fort Bliss, sir. General Howard is expecting you at Building 402. You'll need to follow this road and make a left at the third intersection." Carson returned the salute, noting the respect in the young soldier's eyes. That look never failed to make him uncomfortable. He didn't consider himself a hero, just a tank commander who had done his job and been lucky enough to bring most of his men home. As he drove through the base, memories surfaced unbidden. The familiar layout of the military installation had changed over the years, new buildings rising where empty fields had once been. But the essence remained the same. The parade grounds where tank crews had celebrated victories. The memorial garden where they had mourned losses. The sprawling training grounds where men had transformed from civilians into soldiers, and tanks had evolved from machines into weapons. His mind drifted back to 1963 when he was just 16 years old. His father, Master Sergeant William Carson, a decorated veteran of World War II's 2nd Armored Division, had first shown him an M60 Patton tank at an Armed Forces Day display. "That right there, Frank, is 70 tons of American backbone," his father had said, resting a hand on the massive steel track. "The Soviets have more tanks, but ours are better because we build them for the men inside, not just for the generals who order them." Young Frank had climbed up on the tank, peering into the commander's cupola with wide eyes. The inside of the tank smelled of oil, metal, and purpose. Something had clicked in him that day. A recognition. A calling. By the time he'd climbed down, Frank Carson knew what he would do with his life. Now, 42 years later, Carson parked his truck in front of Building 402, a modern glass and concrete structure that housed the Armored Vehicle Testing and Evaluation Center. He sat for a moment staring at his reflection in the rearview mirror. Gray had overtaken the sandy brown of his military crew cut, and the crow's feet around his eyes had deepened into permanent fixtures. But his eyes, those were the same. Clear blue, sharp, assessing. The eyes of a tank commander who had learned to make split-second decisions with lives hanging in the balance. Carson grabbed his battered leather briefcase from the passenger seat and stepped out into the heat. His khakis and button-down shirt marked him as a civilian now, but his ramrod straight posture and purposeful stride betrayed his military past. The air-conditioned lobby of Building 402 offered blessed relief from the Texas heat. A young woman in a crisp Army service uniform stood as he approached the reception desk. "Colonel Carson, I'm Lieutenant Emma Carter. The general asked me to escort you directly to the conference room. They're waiting for you." Carson nodded, falling into step beside the lieutenant as she led him through a security checkpoint and into an elevator. As they ascended, Carter spoke with the careful precision of someone who had rehearsed her words. "Sir, it's an honor to meet you. My father served in the 1st Armored Division during Desert Storm. He always said the tank commanders of the 73 Easting Battle were the reason he came home." Carson gave a small nod of acknowledgement. The Battle of 73 Easting had become legendary in armored warfare circles, the last great tank battle of the 20th century, where American Abrams tanks had destroyed more than 80 Iraqi armored vehicles with 0 U.S. casualties. Carson's Desert Hammers had accounted for 17 of those kills. "Your father was the real hero, Lieutenant. We just did our job." The elevator doors opened to a long hallway lined with photographs of American tanks, from the M4 Sherman of World War II to the current M1A2 Abrams. Carson's eyes lingered on a photo of his old tank, hull number A22, its desert camouflage scarred with the black marks of an Iraqi tank round that had failed to penetrate its armor. Lieutenant Carter stopped at a set of double doors and gestured for Carson to enter. "They're ready for you, sir." Carson took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and pushed through the doors. The conference room fell silent as he entered. 8 people sat around a polished oak table, all turning to look at him. General Howard stood at the head of the table, his 2 stars gleaming on each shoulder. "Colonel Carson, thank you for coming on such short notice." Carson moved forward to shake the general's hand. "Never could refuse an order from you, sir." Howard smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Let me introduce the team. This is Colonel Jennifer Hayes, project lead for the M1A3 program." A woman in her mid-40s stood and extended her hand. Her grip was firm, her gaze direct. "Colonel Carson, your reputation precedes you. As does yours, Colonel Hayes. Your work on reactive armor systems is required reading at the armor school now." Hayes nodded, clearly pleased by the recognition. Howard continued the introductions. "Marcus Richardson, chief engineer for the M1A3 prototype." Richardson was civilian, mid-50s with thinning hair and thick glasses. He had the distracted air of a man more comfortable with blueprints than people. Samuel Cooper, Department of Defense advisor. Cooper wore an expensive suit that seemed at odds with the utilitarian surroundings. His handshake was brief, his smile practiced. Carson had met enough Washington types to recognize the look. A political appointee, not a soldier or engineer. "And I believe you already know Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Martinez." Carson turned, surprised to see his old friend standing by the window. Martinez, gunner to everyone who'd served with him, had been the best tank gunner in the regiment, with a nearly supernatural ability to acquire targets. Now in his mid-50s, Martinez had put on weight, but his eyes still held the same intense focus. "Steele," Martinez said, using Carson's old call sign as he crossed the room. The 2 men embraced briefly, the kind of understated greeting between warriors who had faced death together. "Didn't know you were part of this circus, Gunner," Carson said quietly. "Just got brought in last month. They need someone to train crews on the new system." Martinez's expression conveyed volumes that his words did not. Something was wrong. General Howard gestured for everyone to sit. "Colonel Carson, we've asked you here because the M1A3 program is at a crossroads. After 8 years of development and $4.7 billion in funding, we're facing concerns." Cooper leaned forward, his manicured hands folded on the table. "What the general means is that certain old guard elements in Congress are questioning the program's direction. We need your expertise and, frankly, your reputation to help us navigate these political waters." Carson studied the faces around the table. "With respect, Mr. Cooper, I'm not a political operator. If you want someone to schmooze congressmen, I'm the wrong man." "That's exactly why we need you," Colonel Hayes interjected. "Your combat record gives you credibility that none of us have. When you speak about tank warfare, people listen." General Howard nodded. Frank, we need you to evaluate the M1A3 prototype from a commander's perspective. Give us your honest assessment of its combat readiness. Carson leaned back in his chair. And if my honest assessment isn't what you want to hear? The room fell silent. Cooper's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Then we address those concerns, Hayes said firmly. This tank will carry American soldiers into battle. It needs to be right. Carson looked to Martinez, who gave him the slightest of nods. When do I see this new tank? Relief washed over Howard's face. Tomorrow morning. Today, I'd like you to review the technical specifications and development history. Lieutenant Carter will show you to your office and make sure you have everything you need. As the meeting broke up, Martinez fell into step beside Carson as they left the conference room. What aren't they telling me, Gunner? Carson asked quietly. Martinez waited until they were alone in the hallway. The prototype is a technological marvel, Steele, but it's designed by people who've never had to button up and roll into enemy fire. Carson nodded slowly. He'd seen it before. Engineers and bureaucrats creating weapon systems that looked impressive on paper but failed in the chaos of actual combat. That bad? Let's just say I wouldn't want to take it into the kind of fight we had at 73 Easting. Martinez checked his watch. I've got a training session, but meet me at the Officers Club at 1900. There's someone else you should talk to. Carson spent the afternoon in a small office, reviewing technical specifications that read like science fiction compared to the tanks he had commanded. The M1A3 boasted an improved 120mm smoothbore gun, advanced composite armor with active protection systems, a hybrid electric drive system, and, most troubling to Carson, an automated targeting system that reduced the gunner's role to essentially monitoring the computer. At precisely 1900 hours, Carson walked into the Officers Club. The place had been renovated since his last visit, but the essence remained the same, a sanctuary where soldiers could momentarily forget the weight of responsibility they carried. Martinez sat at a corner table with an older man Carson didn't recognize. Steele, Martinez stood, gesturing to the older man. This is Command Sergeant Major William Peterson, retired. He was part of the initial crew testing for the M1A3. Peterson stood with the careful movements of a man dealing with old injuries. He had to be in his 60s, with a weathered face and hands that bore the calluses of a lifetime of service. Colonel Carson, it's an honor. I was with the 3rd Armored in Desert Storm. Different regiment, same fight. The men ordered drinks, whiskey for Peterson, beer for Carson and Martinez, and once the server had moved away, Peterson leaned in. They're going to show you a dog and pony show tomorrow. Everything polished, everything working perfectly. But there are problems with that tank they aren't telling you about. Carson took a sip of his beer. What kind of problems? The automated targeting system fails under certain conditions. Dust, heavy rain, electronic countermeasures. The active protection system that's supposed to intercept incoming rounds has a critical blind spot at close range. And the hybrid drive system overheats after sustained operation. Martinez nodded grimly. I've seen the targeting system fail myself. During a sandstorm test, it couldn't distinguish between friendly vehicles and targets. Peterson's voice lowered further. 2 months ago, during a live fire exercise, the automated loader jammed. Took the crew 4 minutes to clear it. In combat, that's a death sentence. Carson processed this information, his tactical mind already identifying the potential catastrophic outcomes in battlefield conditions. Why hasn't this been addressed? Politics, Martinez said simply. The M1A3 program is too big to fail. Too many careers and contracts riding in it. Peterson nodded. Cooper is the worst of them. Former executive at Dynamics Defense Systems, the primary contractor for the M1A3. Now he's supposedly providing independent oversight for the DoD. Carson's jaw tightened. The revolving door between defense contractors and government oversight was nothing new, but it never failed to ignite his anger. So they brought me in to rubber stamp this thing? That's their plan, Martinez confirmed. Use your reputation to silence the critics. But they don't know you like I do, Steele. You never could keep your mouth shut when lives were on the line. Carson took another drink, his mind racing through the implications. What about Hayes? Where does she stand? Brilliant engineer, Peterson said. Truly wants to build the best tank possible, but she's caught between Cooper's political pressure and the technical realities. The conversation continued as the Officers Club filled with young officers and NCOs, their voices creating a background murmur that ensured privacy. Carson listened as Peterson and Martinez detailed other problems, training shortfalls, maintenance concerns, systemic issues that would become deadly flaws in combat conditions. When Peterson excused himself to the restroom, Martinez leaned closer to Carson. There's something else you should know. General Howard is retiring next month. Word is Cooper's setting him up with a consultant position at Dynamics Defense. 7 figures. Carson felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. Howard had been a good commander, a man Carson had respected. The thought that he might be compromised by the promise of post-retirement wealth was disturbing. So I'm walking into a snake pit, more like a minefield, Martinez corrected. One wrong step, and your reputation gets blown to hell. These people play hardball steel. Cooper has friends in Washington and on Wall Street. Carson nodded slowly, his decision already made. Then I'll need to watch my step. As Peterson returned, Carson stood and extended his hand. Thank you for the information, Command Sergeant. I won't forget it. The older man clasped Carson's hand firmly. Those kids who'll crew that tank, they're counting on you even if they don't know it yet. The next morning dawned clear and hot, the temperature already climbing into the 90s by 0800 when Carson arrived at the test facility. Located at the far eastern edge of Fort Bliss, the sprawling complex contained multiple firing ranges, obstacle courses, and environmental testing chambers designed to push military vehicles to their limits. Colonel Hayes met him at the entrance, her uniform immaculate despite the heat. Good morning, Colonel Carson. Ready to see the future of American armored warfare? Carson nodded, noting the genuine enthusiasm in her voice. Whatever the political games surrounding the M1A3, Hayes at least believed in the technological advances. She led him through a security checkpoint and into a massive hangar. Inside, bathed in fluorescent light, sat the M1A3 Abrams prototype. Carson stopped in his tracks, taking in the machine that represented the next generation of American tank warfare. The M1A3 maintained the iconic silhouette of the Abrams series, but numerous modifications were immediately apparent to Carson's experienced eye. The turret profile had been altered to reduce its radar signature. The traditional commander's cupola had been replaced with a sleek remote weapon station housing a 50 caliber machine gun. The 100 mm main gun featured a new muzzle brake and bore evacuator system. Impressive, Carson admitted, walking slowly around the behemoth. What's the weight? 74 tons, Hayes replied. We've managed to improve protection while keeping the weight increase minimal through new composite materials. Carson ran his hand along the smooth armor plate, feeling the cool metal beneath his fingers. Memories flooded back, the claustrophobic interior of his old A-22, the smell of cordite and sweat, the bone-jarring impact when they'd taken that hit from the Iraqi T-72. I'd like to see the inside, he said. Hayes nodded to a crew chief who lowered the driver's hatch. Carson climbed up onto the tank, noting the improved anti-slip surface of the armor, and lowered himself into the driver's compartment. The interior was nearly unrecognizable from the tanks he had commanded. The traditional steering yoke had been replaced with a control system resembling an aircraft joystick. Multiple digital displays showed terrain mapping, systems diagnostics, and battlefield awareness information. It looked more like the cockpit of a fighter jet than a tank. Carson moved through the tank, examining each crew position. The loader station had been entirely reimagined, with the human loader now supervising an automated system that promised to reduce the time between shots from 6 seconds to 2.5 seconds. The gunner's position featured an advanced fire control system with thermal imaging, laser range finding, and automated target tracking. Finally, he settled into the commander's seat, surveying the array of screens and controls that would be his interface with both the tank and the battlefield. What do you think? Hayes asked, standing on the turret and looking down at him. Carson took his time before answering. It's impressive technology, but technology doesn't win tank battles. Men win tank battles. Hayes frowned slightly. The technology is designed to support the crew, Colonel. The automated systems handle the routine tasks, freeing the soldiers to focus on tactical decisions. Carson gestured to the gunner station. In my experience, there's no such thing as a routine task in combat. Every shot is different. Every target acquisition is unique. Cooper appeared at the edge of the tank, looking up at them. The system has been tested extensively, Colonel Carson. It can identify and engage targets faster than any human gunner. Carson fixed Cooper with a level gaze. In perfect conditions, perhaps, but tank battles aren't fought in perfect conditions. They're fought in dust storms and torrential rain, with equipment failures and under enemy fire. Cooper's smile didn't reach his eyes. Perhaps you'd like to see the system in action before making judgments? That's why I'm here. The demonstration had been meticulously planned. On the firing range, the M1A3 executed a series of maneuvers, engaging stationary and moving targets with impressive accuracy. The automated loader worked flawlessly, feeding rounds into the breech with mechanical precision. The hybrid drive system provided surprising acceleration for a 74-ton vehicle. Carson watched from an observation platform alongside General Howard, Hayes, Cooper, and various other officials. The performance was undeniably impressive, but Carson couldn't shake what Peterson had told him. Under these controlled conditions, of course the tank performed beautifully. As you can see, Cooper said, as the tank completed its final target engagement, the M1A3 represents a quantum leap in armored warfare capability. Carson nodded non-committally. I'd like to put it through some additional scenarios. Cooper's smile faltered slightly, such as night operations, adverse weather conditions, electronic countermeasures. And I want to see it operate with a standard crew, not your test team. Hayes exchanged a glance with General Howard, who nodded almost imperceptibly. We can arrange that, Hayes said, though it will take a day or two to set up. That's fine, Carson replied. In the meantime, I'd like to review the maintenance logs and after-action reports from previous tests. Cooper stepped forward. Those documents are classified. And I have the clearance, Carson interrupted. Unless there's something in those reports you don't want me to see. The challenge hung in the air between them. Finally, General Howard broke the tension. Colonel Hayes, please ensure Colonel Carson has access to all relevant documentation. Mr. Cooper, I believe we have a video conference with the Congressional Oversight Committee in 15 minutes. As Cooper and Howard departed, Hayes turned to Carson with a measuring look. You've already heard about the problems, haven't you? Carson met her gaze directly. Some of them, I'd rather get the full picture from you. Hayes sighed, running a hand through her short hair. Let's go to my office. This isn't a conversation for public spaces. Hayes's office reflected her personality. Organized, precise, with everything in its place. Engineering degrees from MIT and Stanford hung on one wall, alongside commendations for her work on armor systems. On her desk stood a small framed photograph of a younger Hayes in battle dress uniform, standing beside an M1A1 tank in what looked like the Kuwaiti desert. Gulf War? Carson asked, nodding toward the photo. Yes, I was a lieutenant with the 24th Infantry Division, engineering officer, not a tanker, but I worked closely with the armor units. Carson nodded with newfound respect. Hayes wasn't just an academic. She'd been in theater during the conflict, even if not directly in combat. You asked about problems, she said, taking a seat behind her desk and gesturing for Carson to sit opposite her. Yes, we've had issues with the automated systems in certain conditions. That's not unusual for any development program of this complexity. But, Carson prompted, but Cooper and his team have been pushing to move forward despite these issues. They've rewritten test parameters to avoid scenarios where we've seen failures. They've cherry-picked data for reports to Congress. And you've allowed this? There was no accusation in Carson's tone, just a question. Hayes's expression hardened. I've fought it every step of the way. Filed formal objections, insisted on additional testing. That's why I pushed to bring you in. I need someone with your credibility to confirm what I've been saying all along. Carson studied her, looking for any sign of deception. What exactly have you been saying, Colonel? That the M1A3 isn't ready for production, that rushing it into service to meet political timelines would be dangerous for our tank crews. She leaned forward. I've designed weapon systems my entire career, Colonel. I don't want my legacy to be a tank that gets American soldiers killed. The sincerity in her voice convinced Carson. So you and Cooper are on opposite sides of this? Completely. Cooper represents the worst of the military-industrial complex. Profit over performance, schedules over safety. She hesitated. And he has General Howard's ear. Because of the retirement position? Hayes looked surprised. You know about that? I hear things. Carson leaned back in his chair. What's your assessment of the M1A3's core design, setting aside the automated systems that are giving you trouble? The core design is sound. The armor package is revolutionary. Better protection at lower weight. The main gun is a significant improvement over the current 120 millimeters. The power plant, when working properly, gives us tactical mobility advantages we've never had before. So the problems are primarily with the automated systems? Yes, and with integration. Getting all these cutting-edge technologies to work together consistently has been a nightmare. Hayes stood and walked to a whiteboard covered in technical diagrams. The fundamental issue is that Cooper and his people want to remove humans from the equation wherever possible. They talk about reducing crew burden, but what they're really doing is taking away the human judgment that makes our tanks superior. Carson nodded, thinking of the countless split-second decisions he'd made in combat, decisions no algorithm could replicate. I'm going to need to see this tank perform under realistic conditions, he said, not the choreographed demonstration we saw today. I can arrange that, Hayes replied, but Cooper will fight it. He knows what will happen. Let me worry about Cooper. Carson stood. For now, I want those maintenance logs and after-action reports. All of them, not just the ones that make the M1A3 look good. Hayes nodded. I'll have them sent to your office within the hour. As Carson turned to leave, Hayes called after him. Colonel Carson, thank you for taking this seriously. Most of the other consultants they brought in just took the tour, nodded at all the right moments, and collected their checks. Carson paused at the door. I commanded men in battle, Colonel Hayes. Sent them into harm's way. Some didn't come back. If my name is going to be attached to this tank in any way, I need to know it won't let those crews down when the shooting starts. For 3 days, Carson immersed himself in technical documentation, maintenance reports, and test results. The picture that emerged confirmed his worst fears. The M1A3, for all its impressive technology, was plagued with integration problems, software glitches, and mechanical failures that could prove fatal in combat. The automated targeting system, the crown jewel of the tank's modernization, failed completely in heavy dust conditions, precisely the environment where tanks most often fought. The active protection system designed to intercept incoming projectiles worked brilliantly against RPGs and older anti-tank missiles, but struggled to defeat more modern threats. The automated loader jammed at least once in every extended exercise. Most troubling to Carson was a pattern of data manipulation. Test results that showed problems were classified as anomalies and excluded from summary reports. Failed tests were rerun under easier conditions until they produced favorable results. On the 4th day, Carson met with the Martinez at the tank simulator facility. They had arranged for 4 experienced tank crew members to run the M1A3 through a series of virtual combat scenarios based on actual engagements from Desert Storm. Cooper tried to shut this down, Martinez said as they watched the crew prepare. Said it wasn't an approved testing protocol. Carson grunted. I bet he did. What changed his mind? General Howard overruled him. I think the old man is starting to have second thoughts about his retirement plan. The simulation began with the famous 73 Easting scenario, American tanks advancing through a sandstorm, suddenly encountering dug-in Iraqi forces. In the original battle, American M1A1s had destroyed the Iraqi armor with minimal difficulty, despite being outnumbered. The results with the simulated M1A3 were disturbing. The automated targeting system repeatedly lost track of targets in the swirling sand. The commander had to override the system and engage manually, slowing response time. 2 of the simulated M1A3s were destroyed by Iraqi T-72s that should have been easy kills. Carson watched the crew's frustration grow as they fought the automated systems that were supposed to help them. By the end of the 3rd scenario, the verdict was clear. The M1A3, as currently configured, would get American soldiers killed in actual combat. This is worse than I thought, Carson said quietly as the crew exited the simulator, their faces grim. Now you see why I wanted you here, Martinez replied. These systems might look good in a PowerPoint presentation, but they'll fail when it matters most. Carson nodded slowly. I need to speak with General Howard, privately. Arranging a private meeting with a 2-star general wasn't easy, but Carson's reputation carried weight. That evening, he found himself in Howard's office, the Fort Bliss landscape stretching out beyond the windows as the sun set in a blaze of orange and red. You've got concerns, Howard said without preamble as Carson took a seat. It wasn't a question. Major concerns, General. The M1A3 isn't ready for production. It's not even close. Howard sighed, suddenly looking every one of his 60-plus years. I know. The admission surprised Carson. Then why are we still moving forward? Politics, money, the usual reasons. Howard stood and walked to the window. Do you know how much has been invested in this program, Frank? Nearly $5 billion. There are 16 senators and 42 representatives with M1A3 production facilities in their districts. With respect, sir, that doesn't change the fact that this tank will get American soldiers killed if it goes into combat as is. Howard turned back to face him. Cooper says the problems can be fixed in the production phase. Software updates, minor mechanical adjustments. Cooper is wrong or he's lying. These aren't minor issues. The entire philosophy behind this tank is flawed. We're trying to replace human judgment with algorithms, and it doesn't work. Howard studied Carson for a long moment. Your official report will say this? It will, in detail, with specific examples and data to back it up. Cooper won't like that. He has friends in Washington, powerful friends. Carson shrugged. I'm not looking to make friends, General. I'm looking to make sure our tank crews come home alive. Howard returned to his desk, his decision visible in the set of his shoulders. Write your report, Frank. The unvarnished truth. I'll make sure it gets to the right people. And Cooper's retirement offer? Carson asked bluntly. Howard's eyebrows rose in surprise, then he gave a rueful smile. You always were well-informed. That offer is now off the table. My conscience is worth more than a consulting contract. Carson nodded, satisfied. As he rose to leave, Howard spoke again. They're going to come after you, you know. Question your relevance. Call you a dinosaur who doesn't understand modern technology. Let them, Carson replied. I understand what matters in tank warfare. I've seen it firsthand. 2 days later, Carson submitted his report. 67 pages of detailed analysis backed by test data, maintenance records, and simulator results. His conclusion was unequivocal. The M1A3 Abrams program needed fundamental restructuring before any production could begin. The response was swift and brutal. Cooper called an emergency meeting of the program leadership, including Carson. In the same conference room where they had first met, Cooper now stood at the head of the table, his face flushed with anger. This report is a hatchet job, he said, slapping a copy of Carson's document onto the table. It cherry-picks negative data while ignoring the M1A3's documented successes. Carson sat calmly, hands folded before him. Every statement in that report is supported by your own test data, Mr. Cooper. Data taken out of context, you're describing prototype issues as if they were production flaws. Those prototype issues will become production flaws if we don't address them now. Cooper turned to General Howard. General, this is precisely why bringing in outside consultants with outdated experience is dangerous. Colonel Carson's understanding of modern battlefield technology is 20 years behind the curve. Before Howard could respond, Colonel Hayes spoke up. That's not true, and you know it. Colonel Carson's analysis aligns perfectly with concerns my engineering team has raised repeatedly over the past 18 months. Cooper's eyes narrowed. Concerns that were addressed to my satisfaction. To your satisfaction, Carson said evenly, but not to the satisfaction of the engineers actually building this tank, and certainly not to the satisfaction of the crews who will have to fight in it. The room fell silent. Cooper looked around the table, finding little support in the faces that looked back at him. Even Richardson, the chief engineer, avoided his gaze. General Howard, Cooper said finally, I'll be speaking with the Secretary of Defense about this. The M1A3 program is too important to be derailed by one man's outdated perspective. Howard nodded. That is your prerogative, Mr. Cooper, and I'll be speaking with the Secretary as well to recommend Colonel Carson's report receive full consideration at the highest levels. Cooper gathered his papers with barely contained fury. This meeting is adjourned. As the room emptied, Martinez approached Carson with a grim smile. You just made an enemy for life. I've had worse, Carson replied. Iraqi tank commanders for one. Hayes joined them, her expression a mix of concern and admiration. Cooper wasn't bluffing about calling the secretary. He has direct access. Let him call, Carson said. The facts are on our side. Carson spent that evening at his temporary quarters, reviewing his notes and preparing for the storm he knew was coming. Around 2100 hours, his phone rang. The caller ID showed a Washington, D.C. area code. Carson. Colonel Carson, this is Secretary of Defense Williams. I understand you've stirred up quite a hornet's nest down there at Fort Bliss. Carson straightened instinctively, though there was no one to see it. Just doing what I was asked to do, Mr. Secretary, providing an honest assessment. Yes, I've seen your report, concerning reading, to say the least. Those are my findings, sir, based on extensive review of the available data. There was a pause, and Carson could hear papers shuffling. Cooper tells a different story, says you're against the automated systems on principle, not based on their performance. Cooper is wrong, sir. I have no objection to technology that works. My objection is to technology that fails when soldiers' lives depend on it. Another pause. You commanded tanks in Desert Storm, correct? At the 73 Easting engagement? Yes, sir. My platoon destroyed 17 Iraqi vehicles that day. Impressive record. The secretary's tone softened slightly. Colonel, I'm going to be direct with you. There's tremendous pressure to move the M1A3 into production. Billions have been invested, promises have been made to Congress. Carson waited, sensing what was coming. If you were to reconsider certain aspects of your report, perhaps focus more on the positives, suggest that the issues could be resolved during the production phase, it would be easier for everyone. Easier for everyone except the tank crews who'll die when these systems fail in combat, Mr. Secretary. The line went silent for several seconds. When the Secretary spoke again, his voice had hardened. I understand your position, Colonel, and I respect your conviction, but I should warn you, there will be consequences for taking this stand. Carson thought of Staff Sergeant Jackson's Bronze Star, still hanging from his rearview mirror, of the men who hadn't made it home from Iraq, of the young soldiers who would crew these tanks in future conflicts. I'm prepared to accept those consequences, Mr. Secretary. Very well. Good evening, Colonel. The line went dead. Carson set the phone down slowly, aware that he had just likely ended any consulting career he might have had with the Defense Department. At 58, with a military pension and modest savings, he could manage financially. But the principle of the thing burned in his gut. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. He opened it to find Colonel Hayes standing there, her expression grave. May I come in? Carson stepped aside, allowing her to enter. She held a tablet computer in her hands. I just got word from a contact in Washington, she said without preamble. Cooper is moving to discredit you. They're preparing a rebuttal to your report that questions your technical understanding and suggests your combat experience is irrelevant to modern warfare. Carson had expected as much. Let them try. Hayes shook her head. You don't understand. They're going to win this fight, Carson. They have too much political capital invested. The M1A3 will go into production, flaws and all. Then why are you here? Hayes set the tablet on the table, bringing up a series of technical diagrams. Because there's another way. I've been working on an alternative proposal, a modified M1A2 that incorporates the best elements of the M1A3 program, the improved armor, the upgraded main gun, but keeps the proven manual systems for targeting and loading. Carson studied the diagrams with growing interest. The design was elegant in its simplicity, evolutionary rather than revolutionary, building on what worked while carefully integrating new technologies. This could work, he said finally, but Cooper would never allow it. Cooper doesn't need to allow it. General Howard still commands this base and he controls the testing facilities. If we could demonstrate a working prototype. Carson looked up from the tablet, seeing the determination in Hayes' eyes. You want to build this? Off the books. She nodded. I have a small team of engineers who believe in this approach. We've been working nights and weekends, using parts from the development program that were officially scrapped. We have most of a functional tank built in a maintenance bay that's officially listed as under renovation. Carson stared at her in disbelief. You could lose your career over this. So could you, she countered. Yet here you are taking a stand. Carson thought for a long moment. What Hayes proposed was risky, borderline insubordination, if not worse. But if it could save American lives, what do you need from me? Your expertise, your combat experience. Help us make this tank not just technologically sound, but tactically effective. She paused. And when the time comes, your voice to make people listen. Carson extended his hand. I'm in. That night marked the beginning of an extraordinary collaboration. While officially continuing his evaluation of the M1A3 program, Carson began working with Hayes' secret team on what they called the Phoenix Project, a tank risen from the ashes of the M1A3's failures. The team worked in an abandoned maintenance bay, far from the main facilities. By day, they were engineers and officers fulfilling their official duties. By night, they became revolutionaries, rebuilding American tank warfare from the ground up. Martinez joined them, bringing his expertise as a gunner and instructor. He recruited a small cadre of experienced tank crew members who provided practical feedback on every aspect of the design. Even Command Sergeant Major Peterson came out of retirement to advise on crew ergonomics and battlefield survivability. Carson found himself energized in a way he hadn't felt since his active duty days. Here was purpose, creating something that would protect American soldiers in the chaos of combat. Each night as he worked alongside Hayes and her team, he saw the tank taking shape not just as a machine, but as a weapons system designed around the humans who would operate it. 2 weeks into the project, their clandestine work faced its first major challenge. Cooper, growing suspicious of Carson's activities, assigned a security officer to assist him, effectively a spy to monitor his movements. Carson adapted quickly, creating elaborately detailed requests for information about the M1A3 that kept the security officer busy during the day. In the evenings, he developed a routine of visiting the officers' club before retiring early, only to slip out a side entrance and make his way to the Phoenix Project's secret workshop. As the alternative tank took shape, Carson became increasingly convinced they were on the right track. The Phoenix incorporated the M1A3's advanced armor and improved main gun, but retained the human-centered control systems that had made American tanks superior on the battlefield. Where automation was added, it was done to support the crew, not replace them. One night, as Carson and Hayes worked late on the fire control system integration, she asked a question that had clearly been on her mind. "Why are you doing this, Carson? You could have written your report, collected your consultant fee, and gone home. Instead, you're risking everything." Carson was silent for a moment, calibrating a targeting circuit with practiced hands. In 1991, during the advance into Iraq, my tank took a direct hit from a T-72. The round hit at an angle, failed to penetrate, but it damaged our communications and injured my loader. We were partially blind, operating on internal comms only, with a crew member bleeding. He set down his tools, the memory as vivid as if it had happened yesterday. We kept fighting. My gunner, Jackson, made a critical adjustment to the targeting system that the manual didn't cover, something he'd learned from experience. My driver executed a maneuver we'd practiced but never used in combat. Between the three of us, we destroyed 5 more Iraqi tanks that day, even with battle damage. Carson looked up at Hayes, his eyes intense. No automated system could have done what my crew did. Human judgment, human courage, human adaptability, that's what wins tank battles. I'm doing this because the men and women who crew these tanks deserve the best chance we can give them to come home alive. Hayes nodded slowly. "I understand, more than you might think." She pulled out her wallet and removed a worn photograph, different from the one on her desk. It showed a young man in desert camouflage, standing proudly next to an M1A1 Abrams. "My brother, Captain Robert Hayes, he commanded a tank during the invasion of Iraq in 2003. His Abrams hit an IED that damaged the electrical system. The backup mechanical controls allowed his crew to continue fighting and get out of the ambush zone." She carefully returned the photo to her wallet. 6 months later, his tank was upgraded to a version with more electronic controls. During another engagement, a systems failure left them defenseless. He didn't make it home. Carson said nothing, but reached out to briefly squeeze her shoulder, the tacit understanding between those who had lost people in war. Their work continued with renewed purpose. As days turned into weeks, the Phoenix Project progressed from concept to reality. The alternative tank took its first breath when they fired up its turbine engine in the dead of night, the distinctive whine muffled by the isolated location of their workshop. Meanwhile, Cooper's campaign to discredit Carson gained momentum. Articles appeared in defense industry publications questioning the relevance of Desert Storm veterans to modern warfare. Carson's military record was scrutinized for any flaws or failures. His technical expertise was dismissed as outdated. General Howard provided what protection he could, but his own position was becoming precarious as pressure mounted from Washington. The M1A3 program had too much political inertia behind it to be stopped by mere facts. 6 weeks after Carson had arrived at Fort Bliss, Cooper called a press conference to announce that the M1A3 had been approved for low-rate initial production. Seated in the audience, Carson watched as Cooper presented carefully curated test results showing the tank's superior performance. "The M1A3 Abrams represents the future of American armored warfare," Cooper declared to the assembled journalists. "With its advanced automated systems, it will ensure American dominance on the battlefield for decades to come." When a reporter asked about concerns raised regarding the tank's performance in adverse conditions, Cooper smiled dismissively. "Those concerns reflect a fundamental misunderstanding of modern warfare. The isolated technical issues identified during testing are being addressed through software updates and minor mechanical refinements." Carson sat stoically, knowing that confronting Cooper publicly would only undermine their secret work on the Phoenix. Better to let Cooper have his moment in the spotlight while they prepared their counterstrike. That moment came sooner than expected. The following morning, Carson was summoned to General Howard's office. He found the general looking grim, with Hayes already seated across from his desk. "We've got a problem," Howard said without preamble. "Cooper knows about your Phoenix project." Someone talked. Carson and Hayes exchanged alarmed glances. "How much does he know?" Carson asked. Enough. He's filing charges, misappropriation of government resources, unauthorized use of military facilities, insubordination. Howard leaned forward. He wants both of you court-martialed, and he wants your alternative tank confiscated and dismantled. Hayes's face paled. When? He's meeting with the JAG officers this afternoon. By tomorrow, they'll have MPs seizing your prototype and all associated materials. Howard stood, walking to the window that overlooked the base. Unless we can stop him. How? Carson asked. Howard turned, a glint of determination in his eyes. By going public first. Cooper has controlled the narrative until now because he controls the flow of information. But what if we change that? What are you suggesting? Hayes asked. A demonstration, a direct comparison between the M1A3 and your Phoenix, live in front of military observers and defense journalists. Carson considered the proposal. Cooper would never agree to that. He won't have a choice, Howard said grimly. I've already invited the Senate Armed Services Committee to observe a special comparative demonstration tomorrow morning. 3 senators are flying in tonight. Hayes let out a low whistle. That's bold, General. It's career suicide, Howard corrected. But I've been in the Army for 35 years. I've sent men into battle. I can't retire knowing I allowed a flawed tank to be their protection. Carson nodded slowly. So tomorrow we put both tanks through their paces side by side. Exactly. Cooper's M1A3 against your Phoenix in a series of realistic combat scenarios. Howard sat back down, his decision made. I've already ordered the range prepared. Cooper doesn't know yet. He thinks tomorrow's demonstration is just another dog and pony show for the M1A3. He'll be furious, Hayes warned. Let him be, Let him be, Howard replied. Once the senators see the performance difference, even Cooper's political connections won't matter. Carson stood. We need to prepare the Phoenix. It's functional, but we haven't had time for full systems integration testing. You have until 0700 tomorrow, Howard said. Make it count. The night passed in a blur of activity. Carson, Hayes, and their team worked feverishly to prepare the Phoenix for its public debut. Martinez drilled the crew on every aspect of operation, focusing on the scenarios they were likely to face in the demonstration. Around midnight, Peterson arrived with 4 retired tank commanders, veterans of Desert Storm, Iraq, and Afghanistan. They put the Phoenix through a series of improvised tests, pushing its systems to their limits and providing last-minute adjustments based on their combat experience. By dawn, the Phoenix was as ready as they could make it. The tank represented a perfect synthesis of proven reliability and cutting-edge technology, a machine designed not to replace human skill, but to enhance it. As the sun rose over Fort Bliss, Carson stood beside the Phoenix, its desert camouflage paint still drying in patches. The tank looked formidable, more conventional than the sleek M1A3, but with a purposeful, functional aesthetic that spoke of its battlefield focus. Hayes joined him, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Carson, her face showing the fatigue of their all-night effort. Win or lose today, she said quietly. I want you to know this was worth it. Carson nodded, taking a sip of the strong black coffee. Even if they shut us down, we've shown there's another way. That counts for something. At precisely 0700, 3 black SUVs arrived at the testing range, carrying Senators Mitchell, Rodriguez, and Blackburn, all members of the Armed Services Committee, all with significant defense interests in their states. General Howard greeted them personally, leading them to a viewing stand overlooking the demonstration area. Cooper arrived moments later, his face flushing red with anger when he saw the Phoenix positioned beside the M1A3. What is the meaning of this? He demanded, confronting Howard. That unauthorized prototype should not be here. The senators requested a comparative demonstration, Howard replied calmly. As the base commander, I'm obliging them. This is completely irregular. That thing hasn't been through proper certification or testing, which makes its performance today all the more interesting, Howard interrupted. Shall we begin? The demonstration consisted of 5 scenarios designed to test different aspects of tank performance. Mobility over rough terrain, target acquisition and limited visibility, fire and maneuver against moving targets, systems resilience under electronic warfare conditions, and crew effectiveness after simulated battle damage. The M1A3 went first in each scenario, performing adequately in standard conditions. The automated systems worked as designed when everything went according to plan. Cooper provided running commentary, highlighting the tank's technological sophistication. Then it was the Phoenix's turn. From the first scenario, the difference was apparent. Where the M1A3 had navigated the obstacle course with program precision, The Phoenix moved with the fluid adaptability of human control, its driver adjusting to terrain changes in real time rather than following pre-mapped routes. In the limited visibility test, a simulated dust storm created by aircraft engines, the contrast became stark. The M1A3's automated targeting system repeatedly lost lock on targets or misidentified friendly vehicles. The Phoenix, with its human gunner supported by enhanced optics rather than replaced by them, acquired and engaged targets with consistent accuracy. The electronic warfare scenario proved most dramatic. When subjected to jamming signals, the M1A3's integrated systems began to fail cascadingly, eventually leaving the tank operational but combat ineffective. The Phoenix, designed with segregated electronic systems and manual backups, continued fighting with minimal degradation. Throughout the morning, Carson watched the senator's expressions change from polite interest to focused attention to outright concern. Cooper's running commentary became increasingly defensive, his explanations more convoluted as the M1A3's weaknesses were exposed. By the final scenario, simulating a tank continuing to fight and after battle damage, the outcome was clear. The M1A3, with its interdependent automated systems, became essentially a 74-ton paperweight when key electronic components were disabled. The Phoenix, drawing on decades of hard-learned lessons about battlefield survivability, continued fighting with degraded but effective capability. As the demonstrations concluded, Senator Mitchell, the committee chairwoman, requested a private conversation with the tank's crews. Carson joined the Phoenix team, standing proudly alongside Hayes, Martinez, and the others who had made their alternative vision a reality. "Impressive performance," Mitchell said, studying the Phoenix with newfound respect, "especially considering the limited resources and time you had to develop it." Carson nodded. "Thank you, Senator. We built on proven foundations rather than starting from scratch." "A conservative approach," Cooper interjected, having joined the conversation uninvited. "The M1A3 represents a bold leap forward, while this hybrid clings to outdated concepts." Mitchell turned to Cooper, her expression cool. "Mr. Cooper, I've been on the Armed Services Committee for 15 years. In that time, I've seen dozens of bold leaps forward that resulted in billions spent and capabilities undelivered." She gestured toward the Phoenix. "What I saw today was a tank designed by people who understand what happens when technology fails in combat." Cooper's face reddened. "Senator, with all due respect—" "I'm not finished," Mitchell interrupted. "The M1A3 program will be placed under comprehensive review. Production will be halted pending further evaluation. And this alternative design will receive full consideration as we determine the path forward." She turned back to Carson and Hayes. "I want a complete briefing on your design philosophy and approach. My office will arrange the details." As Mitchell walked away to rejoin her colleagues, Cooper stood in stunned silence. His carefully constructed program, his political connections, his future prospects with defense contractors, all now in jeopardy because of Carson's stubborn insistence on putting soldiers before systems. "This isn't over," he said finally, his voice low with barely contained fury. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." Carson met his gaze steadily. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with, Cooper. I've met men like you my entire career. Men who see soldiers as numbers on a spreadsheet and combat as a theoretical exercise. You'll never understand what it means to command men in battle, to bear the responsibility for their lives." Cooper opened his mouth to reply, then thought better of it. With a final glare, he turned and walked away, already reaching for his phone to call his Washington connections. Hayes watched him go, then turned to Carson with a small smile. "He's right about one thing, this isn't over. The political fight is just beginning." Carson nodded, looking back at the Phoenix, dust-covered, battle-tested, and vindicated. "But today, we won the battle that matters. We showed there's a better way." As the sun climbed higher over Fort Bliss, casting long shadows from the tanks across the desert floor, Carson felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Whatever political storms lay ahead, he had kept faith with the tank crews who would one day take these machines into combat. He had honored the memory of those who hadn't come home from his war. The Bronze Star hanging from his rearview mirror would swing a little lighter on the drive back to his temporary quarters. Some promises, once kept, freed you to move forward. The morning after the demonstration, Frank Carson awoke to the sound of his phone buzzing insistently on the nightstand. The digital clock read 0542. Only military personnel or telemarketers called at this hour, and telemarketers didn't have his number. Carson, he answered, his voice gravelly from sleep. They're moving against us, Colonel Hayes said without preamble. Cooper spent the night making calls. The Pentagon just issued a directive classifying the Phoenix as an unauthorized prototype and ordering it impounded for technical evaluation. Carson sat up, instantly alert. When? MP detail arrives at 0700. General Howard is stalling, but he can only hold them off for so long. Where are you? At the workshop with Martinez. We're backing up all design data and documentation. Carson swung his legs over the side of the bed, already mentally calculating his next move. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Don't let anyone touch that tank until I arrive. He dressed quickly in khakis and a button-down shirt. The civilian clothes a reminder that he no longer wore the uniform but still fought the same battles. As he left his quarters, the first hints of dawn were breaking over the eastern horizon, painting the desert landscape in hues of amber and gold. The Phoenix workshop was a hive of activity when Carson arrived. Hayes and Martinez supervised a team of engineers frantically downloading data from computers and copying technical drawings. The Phoenix itself sat in the center of the maintenance bay, its desert camouflage pattern catching the light from overhead fluorescence. What's our play here? Martinez asked as Carson entered. We need time, Carson replied, surveying the activity. Time and public attention. Cooper wants this handled quietly, behind closed doors where he controls the narrative. Hayes nodded. The senators from yesterday's demonstration are still in El Paso. They're not scheduled to fly out until this afternoon. Carson checked his watch. How fast can we get the Phoenix operational? Martinez raised an eyebrow. It is operational. I mean fully crewed, fueled, and ready to move out. Hayes and Martinez exchanged glances, understanding dawning in their eyes. 30 minutes, Martinez said. Less if we hustle. Carson nodded decisively. Do it, and get me General Howard on the phone. The general answered on the second ring, his voice tight with tension. Carson, I'm in the middle of something here. Sir, we need to buy time. Cooper's going to bury the Phoenix in all our work unless we can keep it in the public eye. What are you suggesting? Howard asked, wariness evident in his tone. The senators need to see more than just a controlled demonstration. They need to understand what's really at stake here. A long pause followed. Carson, if you're planning what I think you're planning, I can't officially sanction it. I understand, sir. Just make sure those senators don't leave the base before noon. Another pause. I could invite them to an extended briefing on base modernization efforts. Might keep them occupied until around 11:30. That would be helpful, sir. Carson, Howard's voice dropped lower. Whatever happens next, I was not part of this conversation. What conversation, sir? Carson could almost hear the general's grim smile. Good luck, Colonel. With Howard buying them time, Carson turned to Hayes and Martinez. Here's the plan. We're going to take the Phoenix on a little excursion to the senator's briefing. Not through channels, not with permission. We're going to drive this tank right up to Building 402 and park it on the lawn. That's borderline insane, Hayes said, though her eyes sparkled with approval. Sometimes insanity is the only rational response to an irrational situation. Carson turned to the small group of engineers and technicians who had gathered around them. I want to be clear. This is my decision and my responsibility. Anyone who doesn't want to be part of this should leave now. No hard feelings, no questions asked. He waited, scanning their faces. No one moved. All right then, he continued. Let's get that tank ready to roll. The next half hour passed in a blur of focused activity. The Phoenix's engine roared to life, its turbine whine filling the maintenance bay. Carson took the commander's position, with Martinez as his gunner, Hayes as loader, and a retired master sergeant named Reynolds as driver. It wasn't a conventional crew, but each person knew their role. At precisely 0650, 10 minutes before the MPs were scheduled to arrive, Carson gave the order. The massive hangar doors rolled open, and the Phoenix moved out into the morning sun, its tracks leaving distinct patterns in the desert dust. Head for Building 402, Carson instructed Reynolds. Standard road speed, no evasive maneuvers. We want to be noticed, not shot at. As they rolled through the base, the incongruous sight of an unmarked tank moving outside of designated training areas drew immediate attention. Soldiers stopped to stare. Civilian employees pulled out phones to record the spectacle. Within minutes, Carson spotted military police vehicles converging from side roads, lights flashing. We've got company, Martinez observed dryly from the gunner's position. Expected, Carson replied. Keep moving, Reynolds. They won't risk damaging the tank. The MPs took up escort positions, uncertain how to respond to a tank that wasn't actively threatening anyone. but clearly wasn't supposed to be touring the base. Carson flipped open the commander's hatch and stood up, making himself visible to the growing audience. "Building 402 coming up on the right," Reynolds called out. "Where exactly do you want me to park this thing, Colonel?" Carson scanned the area, spotting the manicured lawn in front of the building's main entrance. "Right there, front and center." The Phoenix pivoted smoothly, its left track reversing as the right track advanced, rotating the 70-ton vehicle with surprising grace. With a final lurch forward, it came to rest on the pristine grass facing the main entrance. Carson climbed out of the commander's hatch and stood atop the turret as MPs surrounded the tank, hands on their sidearms, but clearly uncertain about confronting a decorated colonel in a main battle tank. "Colonel Carson!" a voice bellowed from the building entrance. Cooper stormed out, face flushed with anger. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" "Providing a visual aid for the senator's briefing," Carson replied calmly. "I understand they're discussing the future of American armored warfare. Seemed appropriate to have an actual tank present." By now, a crowd had gathered. Soldiers, civilian employees, even a few journalists who had remained on base after yesterday's demonstration. Camera phones recorded the confrontation from multiple angles. "This is completely unauthorized," Cooper sputtered. "That prototype is scheduled for impoundment and evaluation." "Impoundment and burial, you mean?" Carson countered, his voice carrying across the growing crowd. "This tank represents the future of American armored warfare, Mr. Cooper. A future where we value our tank crews enough to give them the best possible equipment, not just the most expensive." Cooper turned to the MPs. "Arrest him! Arrest all of them!" The MP lieutenant hesitated, looking from Cooper to Carson and back again. The situation was well outside standard protocols. Before the lieutenant could decide, the main doors of Building 402 opened, and Senators Mitchell, Rodriguez, and Blackburn emerged, accompanied by General Howard. The senators took in the scene with expressions ranging from surprise to barely concealed amusement. "What's happening here?" Senator Mitchell asked, her authoritative voice cutting through the tension. Cooper moved quickly to her side. "A serious breach of protocol, Senator. Colonel Carson has commandeered an unauthorized prototype in direct violation of Pentagon directives." Mitchell turned to Carson, still standing atop the Phoenix. "Is this true, Colonel?" "I've brought the future of American tank warfare to your attention, Senator," Carson replied. "This tank represents the best of both worlds, cutting-edge technology combined with battle-proven reliability. Cooper wants it disappeared because it threatens his billion-dollar boondoggle." The senator's eyes narrowed as she assessed the situation. With decades in Washington politics, she recognized a pivotal moment when she saw one. "Mr. Cooper," she said finally, "I believe we should continue our briefing outside. Colonel Carson clearly has additional information relevant to our discussion." Cooper's protest died on his lips as Mitchell walked purposefully toward the Phoenix, her fellow senators following in her wake. The crowd parted to let them through, and the MPs stepped back, relieved to have the decision taken out of their hands. "Perhaps you could give us a more detailed explanation of this alternative design, Colonel?" Mitchell called up to Carson. Carson nodded, climbing down from the turret to meet the senators at ground level. "I'd be happy to, Senator, but first, I think you should meet the people who made it possible." He introduced Hayes, Martinez, and the core team members who had emerged from the tank. For the next hour, they conducted an impromptu briefing on the Phoenix's design philosophy and capabilities, answering questions with the straightforward honesty of professionals who knew their craft. Cooper watched from the periphery, his face a mask of controlled fury as he worked his phone, presumably calling in whatever political favors he had left. By midday, news helicopters hovered overhead, capturing footage of the senators examining the Phoenix. Military bloggers had picked up the story, spreading it across social media platforms. That Phoenix tank was trending, with veterans and active duty soldiers weighing in on the controversy. Senator Mitchell approached Carson as the briefing wound down. "Quite a show you've put on, Colonel. Effective, I'll grant you that. Sometimes the only way to fight bureaucracy is with a spectacle, Senator." She smiled slightly. "I've been in Washington long enough to appreciate that reality." Her expression turned serious. "But you've put yourself in a precarious position. Cooper has powerful allies. I'm aware of the risks." Mitchell studied him for a moment. "The Armed Services Committee will be convening a special hearing on the future of the Abrams program next week. I'd like you to testify." Carson nodded. "I'll be there." "Good." She handed him a business card. "My direct line. Call if there are any developments before then." As the senators departed, escorted by General Howard, Cooper finally made his move. He approached with two men in dark suits, civilian security contractors, judging by their bearing and discreet earpieces. Colonel Carson, by order of the Secretary of Defense, you are hereby removed from the M1A3 evaluation program. These gentlemen will escort you off the base. You are to have no further contact with Fort Bliss personnel or access to any materials related to the Abrams development program. Carson had expected this. Am I under arrest, Mr. Cooper? Not yet, Cooper replied with cold satisfaction. But the Pentagon's legal office is reviewing potential charges for misappropriation of government resources and unauthorized use of military equipment. I see. Carson turned to Hayes and Martinez. Take care of our baby. I'll see you in Washington. Hayes stepped forward. Sir, I was equally involved in this project. If the colonel is being removed, I should be as well. Your time will come, Colonel Hayes, Cooper said dismissively. For now, you're confined to base pending further investigation. Carson shook his head. Don't fall on your sword for me, Hayes. The Phoenix needs you. Before she could protest further, Carson allowed the security contractors to escort him to his quarters to collect his personal belongings. Within an hour, he was driving his truck toward the main gate, the bronze star still swinging gently from his rearview mirror. As he passed through the checkpoint, the young MP who had greeted him on his arrival snapped a salute. Carson returned it, touched by the gesture of respect from a soldier who clearly understood more than his rank suggested. The highway stretched before him, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the desert. Carson dialed a number on his phone, putting it on speaker as he drove. Peterson, answered the gruff voice of the retired command sergeant major. It's Carson. How fast can you assemble our old guard? Peterson chuckled. Figured I'd be hearing from you after that stunt this morning. Give me 48 hours. Where should we meet? Carson thought for a moment. My cabin in the Davis Mountains. Bring whatever resources you can. We're going to need all the help we can get. 2 days later, Carson's remote cabin had been transformed into an impromptu war room. The rustic living room was now dominated by a large folding table covered with documents, laptop computers, and empty coffee cups. Maps and technical diagrams were tacked to the wooden walls. Peterson had assembled an impressive team, 4 retired tank commanders from different eras, 2 defense industry engineers who had quietly supported the Phoenix Project, and a former Pentagon public affairs officer named Margaret Winters, who now worked as an independent media consultant. The situation is fluid, Winters was saying, bringing the group up to speed. Cooper has managed to get the Phoenix classified as a security risk requiring comprehensive evaluation. It's been moved to a secure facility on base. Translation, they're taking it apart to see how it works, then they'll bury the findings, said Bill Harmon, a 72-year-old veteran of the Korean War who had commanded M48 Patton tanks against North Korean T-34s. Exactly, Carson confirmed. Meanwhile, the M1A3 program continues. Cooper is calling yesterday's demonstration an anomaly that doesn't reflect the tank's true capabilities. James Wilson, a Vietnam veteran who had commanded tanks during the Easter Offensive of 1972, leaned forward. So what's our play here? We're just a bunch of old tankers with no official standing. We have something more valuable than official standing, Carson replied. We have the truth, experience, and credibility with the people who matter most, the soldiers who will risk their lives in these tanks. He unfolded a large document on the table, a comprehensive analysis of the M1A3's flaws, backed by test data and first-hand observations. This report contains everything we know about the M1A3's deficiencies. Winters is going to help us get it to every member of the Armed Services Committee before next week's hearing. Cooper will claim it's classified information, Peterson warned. We've been careful, Carson assured him. Everything in this report can be sourced to unclassified documents or direct observations that aren't covered by security agreements. Winters nodded. I've already lined up meetings with staffers from 6 committee members' offices. They're receptive, especially after yesterday's spectacle made national news. Good. Carson turned to the engineers. What about the Phoenix specs? Can we recreate what we did if they succeed in burying Hayes' prototype? The senior engineer, a retired Lockheed Martin employee named Roberts, shook his head, not without access to the original design files. We can describe the concepts, but rebuilding it would require resources beyond what we have here. Carson frowned. This was a significant obstacle. Then we need to ensure those files survive, regardless of what happens to the physical prototype. I might be able to help with that, a new voice said from the doorway. Everyone turned to see Colonel Hayes standing there, looking travel-worn but determined. Martinez stood behind her, along with two junior officers Carson recognized from the Phoenix team. "Hayes," Carson exclaimed, rising to greet her. "How did you find us?" "Martinez remembered you mentioning this place once." She held up a hard drive. "We brought insurance." Carson ushered them inside, making quick introductions. Hayes placed the hard drive on the table like a precious artifact. Complete Phoenix documentation, including design files, test results, and comparison data with the M1A3. Everything you need to rebuild it if necessary. "How did you get off base?" Carson asked. "Cooper had you confined." Hayes and Martinez exchanged glances. "Let's just say General Howard arranged for a training exercise that required our presence. Once off base, we took an unscheduled detour." "You realize this is career suicide," Carson said quietly. Hayes nodded. "Some things matter more than careers, Colonel. You taught me that." The expanded team worked through the night, refining their strategy for the Washington hearing. Hayes and her engineers integrated their firsthand knowledge of the Phoenix with the broader critique of the M1A3 program. Winters crafted messaging that would resonate with both military and civilian audiences. By morning, they had compiled a comprehensive case against the M1A3 and for the Phoenix alternative. The challenge now was getting it in front of the right people before Cooper could block them. "Cooper isn't sitting idle," Winters warned as they finalized their plans. "My contacts say he's launched a full-scale damage control operation. He's briefing friendly committee members, lining up expert witnesses to counter your testimony." "Expected," Carson replied. "But he's fighting from a position of weakness now. The Phoenix proved its superiority in direct comparison. That's hard to explain away." "Don't underestimate Washington's capacity for self-deception," Peterson cautioned. "If there's money involved, they can convince themselves of anything. Then we'll need to make our case not just to the committee, but to the American people," Carson decided. "Winters, can you arrange media coverage?" "Already on it. Several military correspondents very interested in your story. The old guard versus new technology angle has appeal beyond the defense community." Carson nodded, satisfied with their progress. "Get some rest, everyone. We leave for Washington tomorrow." As the others dispersed to catch a few hours of sleep, Hayes lingered behind. "There's something you should know," she said once they were alone. "Cooper didn't just remove you from the program. He's been digging into your service record, looking for anything he can use against you." Carson shrugged. "My record speaks for itself. He's focusing on a mission in the final days of Desert Storm. Something about a questionable engagement with an Iraqi unit that had possibly been trying to surrender." Carson's expression hardened. The memory of that day still haunted him. The confusion of battle, the split-second decisions, the aftermath. "February 91, he said quietly. "My platoon was advancing toward Kuwait City. We encountered an Iraqi T-72 company that had taken cover in an industrial area. The lead tank raised its main gun toward us, then lowered it, raised it again, then lowered it. They were trying to surrender? Possibly. Or they were indecisive about fighting. Or they were attempting to lure us into a trap. In the chaos of battle, with lives on the line, I made the call to engage." Carson's eyes grew distant. "We destroyed all 4 tanks. Later, we found white flags in one of the turrets." Hayes nodded, understanding the impossible weight of such decisions. "Cooper will use this against you. Let him try. Every tank commander who's seen actual combat will understand. The ones who haven't aren't the ones I'm trying to convince." The following morning, the team departed in a small convoy for the El Paso airport. Carson rode with Hayes and Martinez, using the drive to refine their testimony for the upcoming hearing. "Cooper will try to paint you as outdated, resistant to technological progress," Hayes warned. "He'll have experts talking about the future of warfare and how automation is inevitable." "Let him," Carson replied. "I'm not against technology. I'm against technology that fails when soldiers need it most." Martinez nodded in agreement. "The key is to keep the focus on practical battlefield performance, not theoretical capabilities. That's where the M1A3 falls apart." As they approached the airport, Carson noticed a black SUV following them at a discreet distance. "We've got a tail. 3 cars back. Government plates." Hayes checked the rearview mirror. "Oh, Cooper's people?" "Probably. They'll want to know who we're meeting, what we're planning." Carson shrugged. "Let them watch. We're not doing anything illegal." At the airport, the team split up, taking different flights to Washington to complicate any efforts to interfere with their travel. Carson, Hayes, and Martinez took a commercial flight, while the others departed on later planes. As Carson settled into his seat, he couldn't help reflecting on the strange turn his life had taken. 6 weeks ago, he had been a respected but retiring figure in the armor community, occasionally consulting but largely focused on his quiet life. Now he was the figurehead of a rebellion against the military-industrial complex, preparing to testify before Congress. The flight to Washington passed uneventfully, though Carson spotted another government-looking man watching them from across the cabin. Cooper was clearly keeping tabs on their movements. They landed at Reagan National Airport in the early evening. The Capitol was bathed in the golden light of sunset, the monuments and government buildings gleaming against the darkening sky. Carson had always found Washington both impressive and slightly intimidating. A place where decisions affecting millions were made in sterile conference rooms and over expensive dinners. A car from Senator Mitchell's office met them at the airport, whisking them to a hotel in Arlington, where rooms had been reserved under the senator's office account. It was a practical measure to avoid any interference from Cooper's allies. "The senator would like to meet with you privately before tomorrow's hearing," the aide informed Carson as they checked in. "She'll send a car at 0800. Carson thanked him, then gathered Hayes and Martinez in his room for a final strategy session. They were reviewing their presentation when Carson's phone rang. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar Washington number. "Carson," he answered cautiously. "Colonel Carson, this is Secretary of Defense Williams," the same voice that had warned him about consequences just weeks ago. "I understand you'll be testifying before the Armed Services Committee tomorrow." "That's correct, Mr. Secretary." "I won't waste your time or mine with threats or persuasion, Colonel. You've made your position clear. I simply want you to understand that this hearing has implications beyond the M1A3 program. It touches on matters of national security, defense procurement policy, and military readiness." Carson chose his words carefully. "I'm well aware of the broader implications, Mr. Secretary. That's precisely why I'm testifying." "Very well." Williams' tone was resigned rather than angry. "For what it's worth, Colonel, I respect your conviction, even if I question your judgment. Good evening." The line went dead. Carson relayed the conversation to Hayes and Martinez. "That was oddly civil," Hayes remarked. "Do you think he's reconsidering his position?" "No," Carson replied. "He's covering himself. If the hearing goes badly for Cooper, Williams wants to be able to say he took a measured approach." Martinez nodded. "Politicians always leave themselves an escape route." They continued their preparations late into the night, refining their testimony and anticipating Cooper's counterarguments. By the time they turned in, Carson felt as prepared as he could be for the battle ahead. Morning brought clear skies and unseasonable warmth to Washington. Carson dressed in his best civilian suit, navy blue with a subtle pinstripe, a white shirt, and a red tie. It was as close to a uniform as he could manage, projecting authority without militarism. Senator Mitchell's car arrived precisely at 0800, taking Carson to a private breakfast meeting at the Capitol. Hayes and Martinez would join him later for the formal hearing. Mitchell greeted him in a small dining room reserved for senior members, away from the public areas of the Capitol. She was alone, dressed in a conservative gray suit that spoke of serious business ahead. "Thank you for coming, Colonel," she said, gesturing for him to take a seat. Coffee and a light breakfast had been laid out. "I wanted to speak with you privately before the circus begins." "I appreciate that, Senator." Mitchell poured coffee for both of them. "You should know that Cooper has been extraordinarily active since your Fort Bliss demonstration. He's met with at least 8 committee members, promising everything from base expansions to defense contracts in their districts." "I'm not surprised," Carson replied. "Too much money at stake for him to give up easily." "Indeed." Mitchell added cream to her coffee, stirring it thoughtfully. "He's also been sharing an interesting narrative about you personally. Something about a questionable engagement in Desert Storm." Carson had expected this. "Has he provided the full context of battlefield conditions, the limitations of our identification systems, or the fact that 3 formal reviews cleared my platoon of any wrongdoing?" "Of course not." Mitchell smiled slightly. "Cooper is good at selective presentation of facts. Unfortunately for him, so am I. My first husband was a tank commander in Vietnam. I understand the impossible decisions men like you have to make in seconds." Carson felt a new appreciation for the senator. "Thank you for that, ma'am." "Don't thank me yet, Colonel. Today's hearing will be brutal. Cooper has lined up impressive witnesses, generals, defense experts, even a former Secretary of Defense. They'll all testify to the necessity and inevitability of the M1A3 approach." "And we have the truth," Carson said simply. Mitchell studied him for a moment. "You really believe that's enough, don't you?" In my experience, Senator, the truth has a way of cutting through the noise. Maybe not immediately, maybe not completely, but eventually. I hope you're right. She glanced at her watch. The hearing begins in 90 minutes. I've arranged for you and your colleagues to have a preparation room down the hall from the chamber. My aide will show you there after breakfast. The hearing room was packed by the time Carson, Hayes, and Martinez took their seats at the witness table. News cameras lined the back wall, and every visitor seat was filled with military officers, defense industry representatives, and interested citizens. Cooper sat at an adjacent table with his team of experts, impeccably dressed and projecting confidence. He nodded curtly to Carson, the gesture more challenge than greeting. Senator Mitchell called the hearing to order precisely at 1,000 hours. After opening statements establishing the purpose, to evaluate the future direction of American main battle tank development, she invited Cooper to present the case for the M1A3 program. Cooper was smooth and persuasive, armed with glossy presentation materials and compelling videos of the M1A3 performing under ideal conditions. He emphasized the technological sophistication of the tank, its reduced crew requirements, and its theoretical advantages in modern warfare. The battlefield of tomorrow demands automated systems, Cooper concluded. Our adversaries are developing similar technologies. If we cling to outdated operational concepts, we risk American lives and American dominance on the battlefield. Several friendly senators asked softball questions, allowing Cooper to elaborate on the M1A3's virtues and dismiss the problems as normal development issues that will be resolved before full production. Then it was Carson's turn. He stood, adjusted his tie, and approached the microphone with the measured confidence of a man who had faced far worse situations than a congressional hearing. Senators, I come before you today not as a Luddite opposed to technological progress, but as a soldier committed to ensuring that American tank crews have the best possible equipment when they go into harm's way. He spoke without notes, drawing on decades of experience and the intense preparation of recent days. Unlike Cooper's polished presentation, Carson offered blunt assessment based on practical reality. The M1A3, as currently designed, places excessive faith in automated systems that have repeatedly failed under realistic combat conditions. Its integrated electronic architecture means that damage to one system often cascades to others, leaving the tank vulnerable or combat ineffective. Carson detailed specific failures from the test data, explaining in clear terms what each would mean for a tank crew in actual battle. He described the Phoenix alternative not as a rejection of technology, but as a more balanced approach that leveraged automation while maintaining crucial human judgment and manual backups. In tank warfare, seconds matter. Systems must work the first time, every time, under the worst possible conditions. The Phoenix achieves this. The M1A3, as designed, does not. The questions from the committee members were pointed, some hostile, others genuinely curious. Carson answered each directly, neither exaggerating nor minimizing the issues at stake. When Senator Jenkins, a known ally of Cooper, attempted to discredit Carson by raising the Desert Storm incident, Carson met it head-on. Senator, I've commanded men in battle. I've made life-or-death decisions with incomplete information and seconds to act. I've lost men under my command, and I've had to write letters to their families. These experiences inform my assessment of the M1A3. This isn't about technology versus tradition. It's about equipment that works when American lives depend on it. Hayes and Martinez testified next, providing technical expertise and training perspective to support Carson's assessment. Cooper's experts followed, attempting to rebut their arguments with theoretical advantages and promises of future improvements. The hearing stretched into the afternoon, the testimony becoming increasingly technical as experts on both sides delved into the minutiae of tank design and battlefield performance. By late afternoon, as the hearing neared its conclusion, Carson sensed the committee remained divided. Cooper had financial and political leverage on his side. Carson had truth and practical experience. In Washington, it wasn't always clear which carried more weight. Senator Mitchell, as chair, offered each side a final statement. Cooper went first, returning to his theme of technological inevitability and warning darkly about falling behind America's adversaries. Then Carson stood for his closing remarks. The room quieted as he gathered his thoughts. Senators, throughout today's hearing, we've heard a great deal about technology, automation, and the theoretical battlefield of tomorrow. What we haven't heard enough about are the men and women who will crew these tanks, the human beings whose lives depend on the decisions you make here. Carson paused, making eye contact with several committee members. I commanded a tank platoon in Desert Storm. My gunner, Staff Sergeant Leon Jackson, was killed when our tank took damage that our systems should have prevented. Every time I get into a tank, I think of Leon and the promise I made to myself that I would do everything in my power to ensure other tank commanders don't have to write the letters I wrote to his family. The room was completely silent now, even Cooper watching intently. The M1A3, as currently designed, breaks that promise. The Phoenix keeps it. Your decision isn't about defense contracts or technological prestige. It's about American soldiers who will face enemy fire trusting that you gave them the best possible equipment to complete their mission and come home alive. Carson returned to his seat, aware of the weight of the silence that followed his words. Mitchell thanked all witnesses and adjourned the hearing, promising that the committee would carefully consider all testimony before making recommendations. As the room emptied, reporters surged forward, shouting questions at Carson and Cooper alike. Security personnel created a buffer, allowing the witnesses to gather their materials and exit through a side door. In the hallway, Cooper intercepted Carson, his face tight with controlled anger. Impressive performance, Colonel. The old soldier routine plays well with certain audiences, but this isn't over, not by a long shot. Carson met his gaze steadily. It never is, Cooper. That's the difference between us. For you, this is about winning a political battle. For me, it's about making sure the right tank reaches the battlefield. Today and every day until the last tank rolls off the production line. Cooper's retort was cut short by the arrival of Senator Mitchell, who asked to speak with Carson privately. She led him to a small conference room and closed the door. You made an impact today, Colonel. Several members who were firmly in Cooper's camp are now questioning their position. But, Carson prompted, hearing the reservation in her tone, but Cooper still has significant influence. The full committee vote won't happen for at least 2 weeks. During that time, enormous pressure will be applied to individual members. Carson nodded. Politics as usual. I'm afraid so, Mitchell hesitated. There's something else you should know. The Pentagon has initiated an official investigation into the Phoenix Project. They're questioning the use of government resources, potential security breaches, the whole 9 yards. Another of Cooper's maneuvers to bury the Phoenix. Likely, but it has real teeth. Colonel Hayes and anyone else involved could face serious consequences. Carson absorbed this news grimly. What about the prototype itself? Currently impounded at Fort Bliss, I've been told it's being systematically dismantled for security evaluation. The destruction of the Phoenix was expected, but still hit Carson hard. That tank represented not just a superior design, but the dedication and integrity of the team that had created it. Thank you for the information, Senator, and for giving us a fair hearing today. Mitchell smiled slightly. I'm not in this job to rubber stamp bad decisions, Colonel, even if they come with billion-dollar price tags. When Carson rejoined Hayes and Martinez outside, he updated them on the Pentagon investigation. Hayes took the news with stoic resignation. We knew the risks, she said simply. No regrets. Martinez was less philosophical. So they're dismantling the Phoenix while the committee deliberates? Convenient timing. Cooper is nothing if not thorough, Carson agreed. He wants to ensure that even if the committee rules against the M1A3, there's no alternative ready to take its place. Their conversation was interrupted by Carson's phone ringing. The caller ID showed Peterson's number. Go ahead, Sergeant Major. Got some interesting news, Colonel, Peterson said without preamble. Our friends at Fort Bliss report that the Phoenix dismantling has hit a snag. Seems several key components have mysteriously gone missing from the impound facility. Carson raised an eyebrow looking at Hayes. Any idea how that might have happened, Sergeant Major? None whatsoever, sir, Peterson replied, the smile evident in his voice. But if someone wanted to rebuild that tank someday, they'd find most of the critical proprietary parts safely stored away. Hypothetically speaking, of course. Of course, Carson said, purely hypothetical. As he ended the call, Hayes was trying and failing to hide a smile. I may have asked some of our more resourceful team members to ensure the Phoenix could rise again if necessary. Hypothetically, Martinez added. Carson shook his head, but couldn't suppress his own smile. You two are going to get us all court-martialed. Only if we lose, Hayes pointed out. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. While the Armed Services Committee deliberated, Carson and his team launched what amounted to a public relations campaign for the Phoenix concept. Veterans organizations arranged speaking engagements. Military blogs published detailed analyses of the competing tank designs. Social media campaigns kept the issue in the public eye. Cooper countered with his own media offensive, bringing in retired generals and defense experts to tout the M1A3's technological advantages. The battle for public opinion mirrored the divided committee, with both sides claiming superior insight into the future of armored warfare. Carson was in the middle of a veterans luncheon in Virginia when his phone buzzed with a text from Senator Mitchell. Committee vote tomorrow, Cooper pulling out all stops. That evening, Carson gathered his core team, Hayes, Martinez, Peterson, and Winters, at his hotel suite to plan their final push. According to my sources, the committee is split 8-7 against the M1A3, with 2 members undecided, Winters reported. Cooper is focusing all his efforts on those 2 senators, Johnson and Rivera. What leverage does he have? Carson asked. Johnson's state has 3 facilities that would manufacture M1A3 components. Rivera chairs the subcommittee on military infrastructure, and Cooper's promising a new training center in his district. Carson nodded grimly. Typical. What can we offer? The truth, Hayes said simply, and a better tank that will save American lives. Sometimes that's enough, Carson agreed, but we need to make one final push. Peterson, arrange calls from every tank commander you know to Johnson and Rivera's offices. Martinez, get your training cadre to send letters emphasizing the practical issues with the M1A3. Hayes, prepare a final technical brief addressing any lingering questions about the Phoenix approach. As the others departed to execute these tasks, Carson sat alone, contemplating the weight of the moment. The M1A3 represented more than just a tank design. It symbolized an approach to warfare that prioritized technology over human judgment, theoretical capability over practical reliability. If it became the standard, it would influence American military thinking for decades to come. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. The caller ID showed unknown, but Carson answered anyway. Colonel Carson. The voice was familiar but unexpected. General Howard calling from Fort Bliss. Thought you should know that Cooper's people have been here all week, pressuring everyone who worked on the Phoenix to disavow the project. Several have been threatened with career-ending reprimands. Are they holding firm? Carson asked, concerned for the junior officers and NCOs who had risked so much. Most are, but that's not why I called. Cooper's team has been conducting their own tests on the M1A3, carefully structured to avoid the failure scenarios you identified. They're presenting these results to the committee tomorrow morning before the vote. Rigged demonstrations, Carson said with disgust. We expected as much. There's more. They've obtained records of all communication between you and Hayes prior to the Phoenix project. They're claiming you conspired from the beginning to undermine the M1A3 program. Carson sighed. Cooper was playing hardball, as expected. Thanks for the warning, General. Good luck tomorrow, Frank. For what it's worth, you're right about the tanks. The Phoenix approach is what our soldiers deserve. The committee reconvened the following morning in closed session. Carson and his team waited in an anteroom, periodically receiving updates from Mitchell's staff. Cooper had indeed presented new test results showing the M1A3 performing flawlessly, though under what conditions remained unclear. Hours passed with no decision. The closed-door deliberations stretched into the afternoon, suggesting fierce debate among the committee members. Finally, at 16:45, Mitchell's aide appeared. The senator would like you all in the chamber. They're ready to announce their decision. The committee room was tense as Carson, Hayes, and Martinez took their seats. Cooper and his team sat across the aisle, Cooper himself projecting confidence despite the strain evident around his eyes. Senator Mitchell called the session to order. After extensive deliberation and review of all testimony and evidence, this committee has reached a decision regarding the future of the M1A3 program. The room fell completely silent. Carson could hear the soft whir of the camera shutters as photographers captured the moment. By a vote of 9-8, Mitchell continued, this committee recommends that the M1A3 program be suspended pending comprehensive redesign to address the critical flaws identified in testimony and testing. Cooper's face hardened, but he maintained his composure. Carson felt a surge of cautious optimism, but knew Mitchell wasn't finished. Furthermore, the committee recommends the establishment of a special design team to develop an alternative approach, incorporating the best elements of both the M1A3 program and the unofficial Phoenix prototype. Mitchell looked directly at Carson. This team should include experienced tank commanders, engineers with practical battlefield focus, and technology specialists who understand the balance between automation and human control. The implications were clear. The Phoenix approach had won, at least in principle. The M1A3 as designed was dead, though aspects of its technology would live on in a more balanced design. This recommendation will be formally submitted to the Secretary of Defense by week's end. Thank you all for your contributions to this critical national security matter. As the session adjourned, Carson exchanged glances with Hayes and Martinez. They had won a significant victory, but the war wasn't over. Implementation of the committee's recommendations would face resistance from Cooper and his allies. Outside the committee room, reporters swarmed around both Carson and Cooper, seeking comment on the decision. Cooper offered a terse, "The department will review the committee's recommendations," before being whisked away by his staff. Carson was more forthcoming. "This decision puts American soldiers first. It recognizes that in tank warfare, reliability and human judgment are as important as technological sophistication. I'm grateful to the committee for their thorough consideration of these critical issues." As the media scrum dispersed, Carson noticed a familiar figure waiting at the edge of the crowd, Secretary of Defense Williams, accompanied by a military aide. The secretary gestured for Carson to join him in a quiet alcove away from the reporters. "Congratulations, Colonel," Williams said without preamble. "You've won the battle. Now comes the hard part." "Sir?" "Implementing the committee's recommendations, creating a tank that actually works without bankrupting the defense budget." Williams studied Carson thoughtfully. "Cooper is finished. I'll be accepting his resignation tomorrow. But his approach had powerful backers who won't simply abandon their interests." Carson nodded, understanding the political realities. "The Phoenix concept proves it can be done, Mr. Secretary. A balance of proven reliability and new technology at a fraction of the M1A3's development cost." "So I've been told." Williams hesitated. "The Pentagon will be establishing a new task force to redesign the Abrams program along the lines the committee recommended. I'd like you to lead it." The offer caught Carson by surprise. "Mr. Secretary, with respect, I'm a retired colonel with a reputation for being difficult. Are you sure I'm the right choice?" Williams smiled slightly. "You're difficult because you care more about getting it right than making people happy. That's exactly what this project needs." He extended his hand. "What do you say, Colonel? Ready for one more tour of duty?" Carson thought of Staff Sergeant Jackson's Bronze Star still hanging in his truck, of the young tank crews who would someday take these machines into battle, trusting that they would perform when lives depended on it. "On one condition," he said, shaking the secretary's hand, "I choose my core team. Hayes and Martinez, among others. We've got a lot of old tankers with young ideas waiting to be called up." Williams nodded. "Done. Report to the Pentagon on Monday. We've got work to do." As Williams departed, Hayes and Martinez approached, having watched the exchange from a distance. "What was that about?" Hayes asked. Carson smiled, feeling the weight of the past weeks lifting from his shoulders. "That, Colonel Hayes, was about the future of American tank warfare, and apparently we're going to build it." The three of them walked together toward the Capitol exit, their path forward suddenly clear after weeks of uncertainty and conflict. "Phoenix Rising," Martinez said quietly. Carson nodded, thinking of the tanks yet unbuilt, the battles yet unfought, and the tank crews who would never know how close they had come to receiving a weapon that might have failed them when they needed it most. Phoenix Rising indeed. The Pentagon stood like a fortress against the morning sky, its massive form embodying both protection and power. Frank Carson parked his truck in the visitor lot, the Bronze Star hanging from his rearview mirror, catching the early sunlight. He sat for a moment, gathering his thoughts. Today marked his first official day as head of the Next Generation Abrams Task Force. At 58, when most of his peers were settling into comfortable retirement, he was beginning what might be the most important mission of his career. He checked his reflection in the rearview mirror. The gray at his temples had spread further since this all began, but his eyes remained sharp and focused. The same eyes that had scanned the Iraqi desert for enemy tanks, now prepared to navigate the treacherous terrain of the Pentagon's bureaucracy. "Let's get this done, Jackson," he murmured to the Bronze Star, a habit formed over years of silent conversations with his fallen gunner. The Pentagon's labyrinthine corridors were already bustling with activity when Carson made his way to the designated office space for his task force. Secretary Williams had allocated them a suite in the Army section, not far from the offices of the Joint Chiefs. It was a statement of priority that wouldn't be lost on anyone familiar with Pentagon geography. Colonel Jennifer Hayes was already there when Carson arrived, organizing equipment and setting up workstations. She looked up as he entered, offering a crisp salute that he returned. "Morning, Colonel. Ready to build the future?" Hayes gestured to the space around them. "We've been allocated 12 workstations, secure communications, full access to the Abrams Development Database, and direct lines to both Aberdeen Proving Ground and Fort Bliss testing facilities. Carson nodded appreciatively. Williams is backing us properly. Good. There's more, Hayes added, handing him a folder. Full authority to select personnel from any branch or facility, priority clearance for materials and equipment, and expedited testing protocols for prototype components. Carson whistled softly. Cooper must have really fallen out of favor. Resigned over the weekend, according to the Pentagon scuttlebutt, last seen clearing his office under escort. Before Carson could respond, Martinez arrived, followed by Peterson and the rest of their core team. Within an hour, the once-empty office had transformed into a hive of activity. Engineers pored over technical diagrams. Former tank commanders debated operational requirements. Computer specialists set up simulations to test various design configurations. By midday, Secretary Williams himself arrived to formally inaugurate the task force. Standing before the assembled team, Williams kept his remarks brief and pointed. You have one mission: deliver a tank that works, not just in demonstrations, not just on paper, but in the chaos and brutality of actual combat. A tank that keeps American soldiers alive and delivers overwhelming lethality to our adversaries. He looked directly at Carson. You have 12 months to produce a working prototype. The future of American armored warfare depends on your success. After Williams departed, Carson gathered the team for their first official briefing. The conference room walls were already covered with diagrams, photographs, and technical specifications. At the center was a large comparison chart showing the strengths and weaknesses of the original M1A3 design versus the Phoenix prototype. Our mission is clear, Carson began. We're going to take the best elements of both designs and create something better than either. The M1A3 had cutting-edge technology, but sacrificed reliability and human factors. The Phoenix maintained reliability, but couldn't incorporate all the advanced capabilities we'll need for future battlefields. He moved to a whiteboard and wrote 3 words: reliable, lethal, survivable. These are our non-negotiables, he continued. Every system, every component, every design choice must serve these priorities. If it doesn't belong on our tank. Hayes stepped forward, taking over the technical portion of the briefing. We'll organize into 3 integrated teams: propulsion and mobility under Major Roberts, fire control and weapons under Captain Wilson, protection and survivability under myself. Martinez added, each team will include both engineers and experienced tank crew members. Every decision gets evaluated from both perspectives. Peterson, standing near the back with his arms crossed, spoke up. What about Cooper's people still in the procurement chain? They won't just surrender because we won a committee vote. Carson nodded, acknowledging the valid concern. Secretary Williams has given us direct purchasing authority for prototype components. We bypassed the normal channels. And the defense contractors who were counting on those M1A3 contracts? Asked one of the engineers. They're welcome to bid on our components, Carson replied. But they'll need to meet our specifications, not the other way around. We're building this tank for the soldiers who'll fight in it, not for corporate balance sheets. The briefing continued for another hour, establishing timelines, priorities, and communication protocols. By the time it concluded, there was a palpable sense of purpose and direction among the team members. They faced an enormous challenge, but the path forward was clear. As the group dispersed to their individual assignments, Hayes lingered behind with Carson. 12 months is aggressive, she said quietly. The M1A3 took 8 years to reach prototype stage. The M1A3 was designing from scratch and reinventing proven systems, Carson countered. We're taking what works, improving what doesn't, and integrating intelligently. It's doable. Hayes smiled slightly. I didn't say it wasn't doable, just aggressive. Carson returned the smile. Good, because we're going to do it in 10 months, not 12. Always under-promise and over-deliver to the brass. The first weeks passed in a blur of activity. The task force worked long hours, fueled by a shared commitment to their mission. Design concepts evolved rapidly as engineers and tank veterans collaborated, each bringing unique perspectives to the problems at hand. Carson established a simple rule early on. Every engineer had to spend time in an actual tank, experiencing the cramped conditions, limited visibility, and physical demands that tank crews faced. Conversely, every tank crew member had to understand the engineering constraints and trade-offs inherent in tank design. This cross-pollination yielded innovative solutions to long-standing problems. When the fire control team proposed a fully automated targeting system similar to the M1A3's problematic design, a veteran gunner suggested keeping the automation but adding manual override controls that could be operated without electrical power. The resulting hybrid system offered the best of both approaches. 4 weeks into the project, they faced their first major challenge. The protection team had developed a revolutionary composite armor package that offered superior protection at reduced weight. But preliminary testing showed catastrophic failures under certain impact conditions. Hayes called an emergency meeting in the ballistics lab at Aberdeen Proving Ground, where the team had gathered to witness the testing. The mood was grim as they reviewed high-speed camera footage of the armor panel disintegrating under impact. The chemical bonding between layers is failing under multi-vector pressure, one engineer explained, pointing to the stress patterns visible in the slow-motion replay. We can strengthen the bonds, but it will add weight and complexity. Carson studied the footage carefully, his mind recalling similar challenges from earlier tank designs. What about a spaced application? Instead of bonding the layers directly, create a matrix structure with controlled deformation zones. Hayes looked skeptical. That would increase the overall thickness, but potentially reduce weight, Carson countered, and improve multi-hit capability. An older engineer who had worked on the original Abrams development spoke up. We considered something similar in the early M1 designs, but lacked the materials technology to make it work. With modern composites, though, within hours, the team had sketched out a modified design incorporating Carson's suggestion. 2 days later, they tested the first prototype panels. The results were promising: better protection, less weight, and significantly improved performance against multiple impacts. This pattern repeated itself across the task force's work. Problems were identified, solutions proposed, tested, refined, and either adopted or discarded based on real-world performance, not theoretical advantages. By the 3rd month, they had functioning prototypes of the major subsystems. The power plant combined the M1A3's fuel-efficient hybrid design with backup mechanical controls from the Phoenix. The fire control system integrated advanced automation with manual backups. The protection package incorporated both cutting-edge materials and battle-proven design principles. Carson insisted on transparency throughout the process. Weekly progress reports were shared not just with Pentagon leadership, but with tank units across the Army. Regular feedback sessions with active duty tank crews helped refine designs and identify potential issues before they became problems. This approach wasn't without controversy. Traditional defense procurement programs operated under layers of secrecy and compartmentalization. Carson's open development process raised eyebrows among the old guard at the Pentagon. 6 months into the project, Carson was summoned to a meeting with the Joint Chiefs. He arrived to find not just military leadership, but representatives from major defense contractors who had been involved in the original M1A3 program. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Blackwood, opened the meeting with thinly veiled criticism. Colonel Carson, while your task force has made impressive progress, concerns have been raised about your unorthodox development methodology, specifically your practice of sharing technical details with frontline units before systems have been fully certified. One of the defense contractor representatives, a smooth-looking executive named Westfield, added, "There are also significant intellectual property concerns. Many of the systems you're modifying incorporate proprietary technologies developed at considerable expense by our firms." Carson had anticipated this confrontation. He remained standing, addressing the room with the direct manner of a tank commander rather than the diplomatic approach of a Pentagon staffer. "General Mr. Westfield, I appreciate your concerns. However, this task force was established with a clear mandate: deliver a tank that works in actual combat, not just in demonstrations or on specification sheets." He moved to a display screen on the wall, bringing up images from recent testing. "Our methodology incorporates input from the men and women who will actually fight in these vehicles. Their expertise has proven invaluable in identifying and solving practical problems that theoretical models miss." Turning to Westfield, he continued, "As for intellectual property concerns, every component we're developing is either based on government-owned technology or being properly licensed from its developers. We're not stealing anyone's proprietary systems. We're improving them, with fair compensation where appropriate." General Blackwood frowned. "That doesn't address the security implications of your open development approach." "With respect, General, it does," Carson countered. "The greatest security threat isn't foreign intelligence learning about our tank design. It's American soldiers dying because we fielded a tank that fails in combat. Our approach prioritizes the latter while still maintaining appropriate security protocols for truly sensitive technologies. The room fell silent as Carson's words hung in the air. Finally, Secretary Williams, who had been quietly observing from the corner, stepped forward. Colonel Carson's task force operates under my direct authority with a specific mandate to break from traditional procurement patterns that gave us the M1A3 debacle. He looked pointedly at Westfield and the other contractor representatives. If anyone has specific objections to their technical approach, I'll hear them. Otherwise, the task force will continue as established. No one spoke up. The meeting concluded shortly thereafter, with Carson receiving a subtle nod of approval from Secretary Williams as he departed. Back at task force headquarters, Carson found Hayes waiting anxiously for news of the meeting. "Still employed?" she asked with a wry smile. "For now," he replied. "Williams backed us completely. The contractors aren't happy, but they can't stop us." Hayes nodded, relief evident in her expression. "Good timing. The whole integration team has something you should see." She led him to a secure bay where the first complete hull prototype was taking shape. Unlike the sleek, angular design of the M1A3, this hull featured a more traditional profile with subtle but important modifications. "We've reconfigured the internal layout," Hayes explained, pointing out the changes. Ammunition storage is now fully isolated from the crew compartment with blowout panels similar to the original Abrams, but with improved blast channeling. Carson examined the design with experienced eyes. Better crew survivability. Significantly, and we've managed to reduce the overall weight by nearly 3 tons while improving protection against both kinetic and chemical energy weapons. Carson ran his hand along the composite armor panel, feeling the carefully engineered layers beneath his fingertips. "How does it perform against the latest Russian and Chinese anti-tank weapons?" "Better than the M1A2? Not quite as well as the theoretical performance of the M1A3 against specific threats. But," Hayes emphasized the qualifier, "it maintains that protection level even after initial battle damage, which the M1A3 couldn't do." "Consistency over peak performance," Carson nodded. "Exactly what we need." The whole integration marked a crucial milestone. For the first time, the various subsystems were coming together into a coherent whole that could be evaluated as a complete weapons platform rather than as individual components. 2 weeks later, Carson received unexpected news. Peterson, who had been managing relationships with tank units across the Army, reported that several commanders had requested permission to send crews to observe the task force's work firsthand. "They've heard about our approach," Peterson explained. "They want to see it for themselves." Carson considered the request. Bringing active duty tank crews into the development process even more directly would further break with tradition, but it aligned perfectly with the task force's philosophy. "Approve it," he decided, "but be selective. We want crews with recent deployment experience, preferably with combat operations." The arrival of the first tank crews injected new energy into the project. These weren't Pentagon staffers or defense contractors. They were the men and women who would stake their lives on the task force's decisions. Their practical insights proved invaluable as the integrated prototype took shape. Staff Sergeant Miguel Ramirez, a tank commander with 3 combat tours in the Middle East, spotted a potential issue with the commander's sight that the engineering team had missed. Corporal Jennifer Wells, a loader from the 1st Armored Division, suggested modifications to the autoloader system that significantly improved reliability under adverse conditions. By the 8-month mark, the first complete prototype was ready for initial testing. Designated XM1A4 Guardian, the tank represented a careful balance of proven technology and innovative design. Its profile was recognizably Abrams, maintaining the iconic silhouette that had dominated battlefields for decades, but with subtle modifications that enhanced both protection and function. The Guardian's unveiling at Aberdeen Proving Ground attracted significant attention within military circles. Senior officers, defense officials, and selected media representatives gathered to witness the first public demonstration of the tank that had emerged from the Pentagon's most unorthodox development program. Carson, standing atop the prototype's turret, addressed the assembled crowd with characteristic directness. "The Guardian isn't a revolution in tank design, it's an evolution, drawing on lessons learned through 70 years of American tank warfare and the blood of tank crews who discovered the strengths and weaknesses of our vehicles in the hardest possible way, in actual combat." He gestured to the tank beneath him. What makes the Guardian special isn't any single breakthrough technology. It's the philosophy behind every component and system. This tank is designed to fight effectively under the worst possible conditions, to protect its crew even when hit, and to maintain combat capability even with significant battle damage. The demonstration that followed showed exactly what Carson meant. The Guardian executed a series of mobility tests, navigating obstacles at speed and demonstrating its cross-country capability. Its fire control system engaged multiple targets while moving, showing accuracy comparable to the best systems in the world. But the most impressive demonstration came during the simulated battle damage test. Engineers deliberately disabled several key electronic systems, mimicking the effects of a penetrating hit. Where the M1A3 would have been rendered combat ineffective, the Guardian seamlessly transitioned to backup systems, maintaining approximately 80% of its combat capability. The observers broke into spontaneous applause when the Guardian, despite its simulated damage, continued to maneuver and engage targets effectively. This wasn't the sterile perfection of a choreographed demonstration. It was the gritty resilience that actual combat demanded. As the official program concluded, Carson found himself approached by an elderly man in civilian clothes whom he didn't immediately recognize. As the man drew closer, Carson realized with a start that it was General James Harrington, retired former commander of the 3rd Armored Division during Desert Storm and a legendary figure in tank warfare circles. "Impressive work, Carson," Harrington said, extending a weathered hand. "You've remembered what so many forget. Tanks fight in the real world, not in PowerPoint presentations." Carson shook the offered hand with genuine respect. "That means a lot coming from you, sir." Harrington nodded toward the Guardian. "The true test is still ahead, though. Pentagon politics can be more dangerous than any battlefield." "We've faced those politics already," Carson replied. "Secretary Williams has provided good cover." "Williams won't be there forever," Harrington cautioned, "and there are plenty of people with long memories and longer grudges about the M1A3 cancellation." Before Carson could respond, they were interrupted by Hayes approaching with a satellite phone. "Urgent call from Washington, Colonel, Secretary Williams." Carson excused himself and took the call, stepping away from the crowd. Williams's voice was tense. "Carson, I need you back in Washington immediately. The House Appropriations Committee is moving to cut the Guardian's funding. Cooper's allies are making a last stand." "I thought we were protected under the special authorization." "You were, but they're using the regular budget process to end-run our authorities. It's a bureaucratic knife fight, and we need our best people on it." Carson's jaw tightened. Just when the Guardian was proving itself, political maneuvering threatened to derail everything. "I'll be on the next flight." He rejoined Hayes and Harrington, quickly explaining the situation. Hayes immediately began making arrangements for their return to Washington, while Harrington listened with a knowing expression. "Told you," the old general said. "Pentagon politics. More dangerous than any enemy tank." Carson nodded grimly. "Any advice, sir?" Harrington considered for a moment. "Remember what you're fighting for. Not a budget, not a program, not even a tank. You're fighting for the young men and women who will crew that vehicle in places where mistakes mean death. Stay focused on them, and you'll make the right decisions." The words resonated with Carson, echoing his own philosophy. "Thank you, sir. I'll remember that." The flight back to Washington was tense, with Carson and Hayes using the time to prepare their defense of the Guardian program. By the time they landed, they had developed a comprehensive strategy that emphasized both the tank's superior performance and the cost savings compared to the original M1A3 program. They headed directly to the Pentagon, where Secretary Williams had convened an emergency meeting with key defense officials and congressional staff. The situation was even more precarious than initially described. Cooper might be gone, but his influence lingered in the network of relationships he had cultivated throughout the defense establishment and Congress. "The appropriations maneuver is just the visible attack," Williams explained. "Behind the scenes, there's a coordinated effort to discredit the Guardian's test results and question the legitimacy of the entire development process." Carson wasn't surprised. Cooper laying mines even after his departure. "Exactly. The contractors who lost billions when the M1A3 was canceled are pushing hard for reconsideration of that decision. They're using the Guardian's deliberate design compromises as evidence that we're fielding an inferior tank." Hayes bristled at this characterization. "Inferior? The Guardian outperforms the M1A3 in every metric that actually matters in combat." "We know that," Williams agreed. But most members of Congress don't understand the difference between theoretical peak performance and sustained battlefield capability. They see charts showing the M1A3 has better numbers in certain categories and conclude it must be superior. Carson considered the challenge. This wasn't a technical problem to be solved with engineering. It was a perception battle that required a different approach. We need to change the terms of the debate, he said finally. Stop comparing specifications and start comparing outcomes. Williams looked intrigued. Go on. We invite the Appropriations Committee to witness a direct comparison, not of technical specifications, but of combat effectiveness under realistic conditions. Carson warmed to his theme. The Guardian versus the salvaged M1A3 prototype in a series of scenarios designed to simulate actual battlefield conditions. Cooper's people will claim the tests are rigged, one of the staffers objected. Then we let them help design the tests, Carson countered. And we use crews they select to operate both tanks. Complete transparency. Williams nodded slowly, seeing the strategy. They can't refuse without appearing to fear the comparison. And if they participate, the Guardian's advantages become impossible to ignore. Exactly, we're not selling a spec sheet. We're selling a tank that keeps American soldiers alive and wins battles. The proposal gained immediate support within the room. Williams directed his staff to begin arranging the demonstration, while Carson and Hayes returned to the task force to prepare the Guardian for its most important test yet. The congressional demonstration was scheduled for 2 weeks later at Fort Irwin's National Training Center, the Army's premier desert warfare training facility. Its harsh terrain and realistic combat scenarios would provide the perfect backdrop for demonstrating the tank's relative capabilities. In the intervening days, Carson drove his team relentlessly to ensure the Guardian was fully prepared. Every system was checked and rechecked. Backup components were ready for immediate installation if needed. The selected crew, a veteran team from the 1st Infantry Division with multiple combat deployments, trained extensively on the new tank. Cooper's allies, meanwhile, had salvaged enough components from the original M1A3 prototype to assemble a functioning vehicle. They selected their own crew from the tank demonstration team, professional operators who knew how to make equipment look good in controlled settings. The stage was set for a decisive showdown between competing visions of American tank warfare. The morning of the demonstration dawned clear and hot over the Mojave Desert. The congressional delegation arrived by helicopter, accompanied by senior military officers, defense officials, and selected media representatives. Carson noted with satisfaction that several tank commanders he had known over the years had found their way into the observer group. Their experienced eyes would understand exactly what they were witnessing. Secretary Williams made brief opening remarks, emphasizing that the demonstration wasn't about picking winners and losers, but about ensuring American tank forces had the best possible equipment. Then he turned the proceedings over to the National Training Center commander, who explained the 4 scenarios the tanks would face. First, mobility and endurance, a 10-mile course over rough terrain with obstacles. Second, target acquisition and engagement under limited visibility conditions. Third, multiple target engagement while on the move. And finally, combat effectiveness following simulated battle damage. The M1A3 went first in each scenario, performing impressively in the initial stages. Its advanced systems handled the carefully prepared course with precision, engaging targets efficiently, and demonstrating the raw power of its technology-driven approach. Then came the Guardian's turn. From the first scenario, the difference in philosophy became apparent. Where the M1A3 had moved with program precision along optimal paths, the Guardian's crew adapted to changing conditions, finding better routes through the obstacles. When unexpected challenges arose, such as a deliberately collapsed bridge not included in the pre-briefing, the Guardian crew improvised solutions, while the M1A3 had required controller intervention. The pattern continued through the limited visibility and moving engagement tests. The M1A3 demonstrated impressive peak performance when conditions matched its parameters but struggled with unexpected variables. The Guardian maintained consistent effectiveness across all conditions, its balanced design providing resilience where the M1A3 showed brittleness. The final test, combat effectiveness after battle damage, proved decisive. Both tanks were subjected to simulated hits that disabled key electronic systems. The M1A3, with its integrated architecture, lost most of its advanced capabilities, reducing its combat effectiveness by over 70%. The Guardian, with its deliberately segregated systems and manual backups, maintained nearly 85% effectiveness despite similar damage. As the dust settled on the final scenario, Carson watched the congressional representatives conferring among themselves. Their body language told him everything he needed to know. They were convinced. The committee chairwoman, Representative Eleanor Garcia, approached Carson as the formal demonstration concluded. "Impressive performance, Colonel. Your tank doesn't just match the M1A3, it surpasses it in ways that actually matter." Carson nodded. "That was our objective from the beginning, Congresswoman. Not to build the most technologically advanced tank possible, but to build the most combat-effective tank for American soldiers." "You've made your case," she assured him. "I'll be recommending full funding for the Guardian program and formally closing any reconsideration of the M1A3. As the congressional delegation departed, Williams joined Carson at the Guardian, where the crew was conducting post-demonstration maintenance. "Congratulations, Colonel. I'd say the Guardian has officially secured its future." Carson watched the crew working on their tank with obvious pride and ownership, exactly the relationship he had hoped to foster between soldiers and their equipment. "The real victory will come the first time this tank brings its crew home from combat when they might otherwise have been lost," he said quietly. Williams nodded, understanding the deeper meaning behind Carson's words. "Speaking of victories, there's something else you should know. The Secretary of the Army is retiring next month. Your name is on the short list of potential replacements." Carson looked at Williams in surprise. "I'm not a politician, Mr. Secretary. I'm a tank commander." "Maybe that's exactly what the Army needs right now. Someone who understands the reality of combat, not just the politics of the Pentagon." Before Carson could respond, they were interrupted by a call for Williams. As the secretary stepped away to take it, Carson turned his attention back to the Guardian. Political appointments held no appeal for him. His satisfaction came from tangible achievements, like the tank before him, ready to protect American soldiers in battles yet to come. 3 months later, the Guardian entered low-rate initial production. Carson declined the Secretary of the Army nomination, preferring to oversee the tank's final development and initial fielding. Hayes accepted promotion to Brigadier General, taking charge of the Armored Vehicle Development Command with a mandate to apply the Guardian's development philosophy to other Army vehicle programs. The first production Guardian tanks were assigned to the 1st Armored Division for field evaluation. Carson traveled to Fort Hood to personally observe the initial training and integration. Standing on a slight rise overlooking the training grounds, he watched as the new tanks maneuvered across the landscape, their movements powerful and purposeful. Martinez joined him, now serving as the Guardian Training Program Director. "They look good out there, don't they?" Carson nodded, feeling a profound sense of accomplishment. "They do. The crews are loving them, especially the maintenance teams. They say the Guardian is the most maintainable tank they have ever worked on." This was high praise indeed. Tank maintenance was a critical but often overlooked factor in combat effectiveness. A tank that couldn't be quickly repaired in field conditions was a liability, regardless of its theoretical capabilities. As they watched the training exercises, a staff car approached along the dirt road behind them. It stopped nearby, and Secretary Williams emerged, accompanied by a man Carson didn't recognize, tall, distinguished-looking, in his 60s. "Colonel Carson," Williams called out, "there's someone who wanted to meet you." Carson and Martinez walked over to the vehicle. As they approached, Carson realized with a shock who the visitor was: the President of the United States. "Mr. President," Carson said, coming to attention and saluting reflexively despite his civilian status. The President returned the salute with a smile. "At ease, Colonel. I wanted to see these new tanks for myself, and Secretary Williams suggested you were the man to explain them to me." For the next hour, Carson gave the President a detailed briefing on the Guardian, explaining its design philosophy, capabilities, and the unorthodox development process that had brought it to fruition. The President listened attentively, asking surprisingly knowledgeable questions about specific systems and design choices. "You know," the President said as they concluded the briefing, "when I approved the Special Task Force to redesign the Abrams, I was told we needed a technological revolution. What you've delivered looks more like thoughtful evolution." "Revolution makes for better headlines, Mr. President," Carson replied. "Evolution makes for better tanks." The President laughed. "Well said, Colonel, and proven correct by the results." He gestured toward the tanks still maneuvering in the distance. "How does it feel, seeing your creation out there in the hands of soldiers?" Carson considered the question carefully. "It feels like a promise kept, sir. To the men and women who will take these tanks into harm's way, trusting that we gave them the best possible equipment to complete their mission and return home safely. The president nodded, understanding the weight behind Carson's words. The nation owes you a debt of gratitude, Colonel, not just for the tank, but for the example you've set, standing up for what's right, even when it would have been easier to go along with the prevailing winds. Just doing my duty, Mr. President. That's what they all say, the true heroes, the president replied with a knowing smile. Nevertheless, I came here to personally inform you that you'll be receiving the Presidential Medal of Freedom at next month's ceremony. Your work on the Guardian has saved lives that haven't even been put at risk yet. There's no higher service to the nation. Carson was momentarily speechless. The Presidential Medal of Freedom was the highest civilian honor in the United States, rarely awarded to military personnel except after landmark achievements. I'm honored, Mr. President, but this was a team effort. The Guardian exists because of hundreds of dedicated people who believed in putting soldiers first. And you led them, the president countered. Don't worry, your team will be recognized as well. But every great achievement needs a driving force. And by all accounts, that was you, Colonel. After the president departed, Carson remained at the observation point, watching the tanks continue their exercises as the Texas sun began its descent toward the horizon. Martinez stood beside him in companionable silence. Presidential Medal of Freedom, Martinez said finally. Not bad for an old tank jockey. Carson smiled slightly. Feels strange. I didn't do this for medals. None of us do. But recognition matters, not for us, but for what we stand for. Martinez gestured toward the Guardian tanks. Every young officer who sees you receive that medal will learn the same lesson. Moral courage matters as much as physical courage. They watched as the tanks formed a line and advanced in unison, their tracks churning up dust that glowed golden in the late afternoon light. What will you do after the ceremony? Martinez asked. Back to retirement? Carson shook his head. Secretary Williams has asked me to head up a new office, Operational Combat Effectiveness, making sure all our weapon systems are evaluated based on how they'll actually perform in combat, not just how they look in demonstrations. Sounds like they're institutionalizing your approach. That's the idea. No more M1A3 debacles. No more choosing technology over effectiveness. As darkness fell over Fort Hood, Carson took a last look at the tanks now returning to their assembly area. Powerful machines designed with purpose and integrity. He thought about Staff Sergeant Jackson's Bronze Star still hanging in his truck. About all the tank crews who had fought and sometimes died in machines designed far from the battlefield. The Guardian wouldn't save every life or win every battle. No tank could do that. But it represented something important, a commitment to the soldiers who would take it into combat, a promise that their lives and mission success had been the priority from the first blueprint to the final production model. For Frank Carson, that was victory enough. Not glory, not recognition, but the quiet satisfaction of knowing he had done his duty to his country, to the Army, and most importantly, to the young men and women who would stake their lives on his work. As he turned to leave, Martinez asked one final question. Was it worth it? All the fights, the career risks, the political battles? Carson thought of the tanks silhouetted against the darkening sky, of the crews who would depend on them, of futures secured and lives that would be saved. Every minute, he replied. 1 month later, Carson stood in the East Room of the White House, surrounded by family, friends, and colleagues who had shared his journey. Hayes was there in her new general's uniform. Martinez and Peterson stood proudly nearby. Even General Harrington had made the trip, representing the long tradition of American armored warfare that the Guardian now continued. As the president placed the Medal of Freedom around his neck, Carson caught sight of a familiar face in the audience, a middle-aged woman with Jackson's unmistakable eyes. His gunner's widow had come to witness the moment. Carson had arranged for her invitation, feeling that Jackson deserved to be represented at this culmination of a journey that had begun in the Iraqi desert all those years ago. Later at the reception, she approached him with a small, wrapped package. I thought you should have this, she said, pressing it into his hands. Leon would have wanted you to have it. Carson carefully unwrapped the package to find a small, wooden display case. Inside, nestled against dark blue velvet, was the Bronze Star he had returned to her after Desert Storm. The same medal that had hung from his rearview mirror for all these years was a replica. I can't accept this, he said, deeply moved but certain the medal belonged with Jackson's family. He earned it saving your lives, she replied gently, and you've spent the last 30 years making sure his sacrifice meant something. It belongs with you now. Carson closed the case carefully, accepting both the gift and the profound responsibility it represented. "Thank you," he said simply. "I'll honor it always." As the reception continued around them, Carson found himself at a window overlooking the White House grounds. In the distance, the Washington Monument stood as a testament to another soldier who had served his country with integrity and purpose. Carson reflected on the journey that had brought him here, from the dust and chaos of Desert Storm to the political battlefields of Washington. Different terrains, different weapons, but the same fundamental mission: to serve with honor, to protect those who depended on him, to uphold the values that defined both the man and the nation. Outside, a light rain began to fall, gentle and cleansing. Carson watched the droplets trace patterns down the window pane, each following its own path, yet part of the same journey. Like the tank crews who would soon take the Guardian into service, each with their own stories but united in purpose and protected by the armor his team had created for them. The Bronze Star in its case was a comfortable weight in his hands, a reminder of the past that had shaped him and the future he had helped to secure. Not just for himself, but for a generation of soldiers who would never know his name, but would rely on his work in moments when lives hung in the balance. For a tank commander, there could be no greater legacy. "Colonel Carson," a young Army captain approached respectfully. "They're waiting for you, sir. It's time for your remarks." Carson nodded, tucking the display case carefully into his jacket pocket, close to his heart where it belonged. "Thank you, Captain. I'm ready." Ready, as he had always been, to move forward into whatever challenges lay ahead, guided by the simple, powerful principles that had defined his service: duty, honor, the unwavering commitment to those who served alongside him and those who would follow in his tracks. The Guardian tank would soon take its place in America's arsenal, protecting a new generation of soldiers as they faced unknown threats in uncertain futures. But the true legacy wasn't the machine itself. It was the spirit in which it had been created, the courage it represented, and the promise it kept to every soldier who would ever command it. You matter. Your life matters. Your mission matters. And we built this tank to ensure you can accomplish that mission and return home safely. As Carson turned from the window to rejoin the celebration, he felt a profound sense of completion. Not an ending, there was still much work to do, but the satisfying closure of a circle that had begun in the desert of Iraq and now encompassed a future he had helped to shape. A future where American tank crews would face danger with the best protection human ingenuity could provide. A future where their Guardian tanks would live up to their name, shielding them in battle's chaos and carrying them safely home. For Frank Steele Carson, former tank commander, that future was worth every battle he had fought to secure it.